Chapter 24. Before long, the old man led a horse-faced, long-bearded man into the room. Out of curiosity, Mo Chinga looked up and saw that the man was in his 50s. His aura was as strong as Yi Jingwen's. He was a foundation-building cultivator. As soon as the man came in, Yi Jingwen stood up and Mo Chinga also got down from her chair. The man glanced at Yi Jingwen. Seeing the Tai Chi symbol embroidered on the right chest of his robe and the auspicious clouds on his sleeves, he knew Yi Jingwen was an elite disciple of Shenqing school. He didn't dare to be disrespectful and cupped his hands. "I'm Lu Shishan. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" Yi Jingwen also returned the greeting. "I'm Yi Jingwen from Shenqing school. I took the liberty to visit you because I have something to ask. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist Lu." Polite people were always popular, not to mention Yi Jingwen was a disciple of a famous school. Lu Shishan had a good impression of him, so he said with a smile, "So it's fellow Taoist Yi. Please sit." Yi Jingwen sat in the guest seat. The old man who welcomed the guests ordered someone to bring them new tea before he left. Lu Shishan took a sip of tea. His gaze fell on Mo Chinga, who was sitting obediently on the side. He stroked his beard and said, "Is this little fellow Taoist Ye's nephew? At such a young age, your cultivation level is already in the second layer. You're a promising talent." Yi Jingwen smiled. "Fellow Taoist Lu, you flatter me." In the secular world, reaching the second layer at the age of 10 was a rare talent. In cultivation clans he could be considered a promising talent, but in a large cultivation group like theirs, he was barely passable. There were many high-level cultivators in their cultivation group. Their descendants had outstanding talents, and they were taught by famous teachers since they were young. They didn't lack medicinal pills, so it wouldn't be difficult for them to reach the third or fourth layer at this age. If they worked hard, it wouldn't be difficult for them to reach the fifth or sixth layer. This kind of disciple usually reached the foundation-building realm at the age of 30. For example, Lu Shishan, who was talented and very hard-working, reached the foundation-building realm at the age of 24. Martial uncle Shoujing was even earlier, reaching the foundation-building realm at the age of 20. However, the earliest foundation-building cultivator in Shenqing school wasn't martial uncle Shoujing, but martial uncle Lingxi of Sweet Dew Peak, who succeeded at the age of 17. Lu Shishan wasn't envious. Although their cultivation clan couldn't compare to a sect, it wasn't to the extent of being so narrow-minded. He was just praising them on the surface. "Fellow Taoist Lu." After drinking his tea, Yi Jingwen went straight to the point. "I took the liberty of coming here to inquire about a fellow Taoist." Lu Shishan had already heard the report from the old man in charge of welcoming the guests. However, he still showed a look of surprise on his face. After all, he did not know the purpose of the other party asking for this information. A month ago, did fellow Taoist Lu come to Shenqing School's shop at the foot of the mountain with a fellow foundation-building cultivator? Lu Shishan nodded. "Yes, is fellow Taoist Yi looking for that friend of mine?" "Exactly." Yi Jingwen said, "Fellow Taoist Lu, is that friend of yours called Yi Jiang? So he's a cultivator from Yi clan of Mount Qingming?" Lu Shishan had doubts in his heart, but he still nodded. "Fellow Taoist Yi is right." He suddenly remembered that this person was also surnamed Yi, so he couldn't help but hesitate for a moment. "Could it be that you are—" Yi Jingwen was also a smart person. How could he not know what Lu Shishan was thinking? He immediately said, "I've never met this fellow Taoist Yi Jiang, but my martial uncle and fellow Taoist Yi Jiang's elder brother are close friends." Lu Shishan was relieved to hear that. Although he was Yi Jiang's good friend, Yi clan being forced to leave Mount Qingming was the joint effort of many cultivation clans in Mount Qingming, including their Lu clan. However, this kind of matter was decided by the core formation cultivators above them, so it was not his turn to speak, so his friendship with Yi Jiang was still there. If an old friend of Yi clan came looking for them, he would still be a bit worried. After all, Shenqing School was the #1 cultivation group in West Kunwu. Cultivation clans like theirs couldn't afford to offend it. "I see." Back then, Senior Yi Hai was indeed a heaven-gifted genius. Yi clan managed to survive for 200 years because of this cultivator. If it weren't for that. The latter part of his words was really inappropriate to say in front of outsiders, so he changed the subject. "Fellow Taoist Yi, may I know who your martial uncle is? What advice do you have for me?" Yi Jingwen smiled and said, "The martial uncle I'm talking about is Master Taoist Shoujing. I don't dare to give advice, but martial uncle was entrusted by an old friend to settle down the descendants of Yi clan." "Master Taoist Shoujing?" Lu Shishan was shocked. Even Mo Chinga could see the solemn expression on his face. She was puzzled. What happened to Master Daoist Shoujing? How could she know that Master Daoist Shoujing could be said to be very famous in West Kunwu? Lu Shishan was already more than 200 years old. He was someone from the same generation as her father, Yihai. However, Yihai had already advanced into the core formation realm when he was more than 100 years old, so he wasn't inferior to the elite disciples of big cultivation groups. On the other hand, their peers in Mount Qingming had always been stuck in the foundation building realm and hadn't had any fated chances to advance. However, compared to Master Daoist Shoujing, they were nothing. Master Daoist Shoujing was the descendant of a nascent soul cultivator in Shenqing School. He was brought to Mount Taikang when he was a child. He built his foundation at the age of 20 and formed his gold core at the age of 78. Reportedly, this Master Daoist Shoujing wasn't a genius with single or mutated spiritual roots. He only had double spiritual roots. Many cultivators like them who were still struggling in the foundation building realm also had double spiritual roots. However, in terms of cultivation level, there was a world of difference between them and Master Daoist Shoujing. In the entire celestial pole, there were only 2 or 3 people who could form their gold core at the age of 78. This kind of fated chance couldn't be obtained with the help of a nascent soul cultivator. In terms of age, Lu Shishan was already more than 200 years old. He himself built his foundation at the age of 40. When he was already a foundation-building cultivator, Master Daoist Shoujing had only just started cultivating. Now, he was still a foundation-building cultivator while Master Daoist Shoujing was already a core formation senior. Right now, Master Daoist Shoujing was only about 130 years old. With his cultivation speed, it was very likely that he could form his nascent soul within 100 years. Lu Shishan himself was also a cultivator with double spiritual roots, but his fated chances were always lacking. Every time he thought about Master Daoist Shoujing, who had the same aptitude as him or even Yihai, he could only sigh helplessly. So it's Master Daoist Shoujing. A look of respect appeared on Lu Shishan's face. Fellow Daoist Yi, please speak. If I know, I'll definitely tell you everything I know. Seeing that the title of martial uncle was really useful, Yi Jingwen bluntly asked, "May I know where fellow Daoist Yi Jiang went and what his plans are? Did he tell fellow Daoist Lu?" Lu Shishan said, "Yi Jiang already moved all the other members of the Yi clan to the secular world. He only came back to take the last collection of the Yi clan. He said it was difficult to make a realm breakthrough, so he planned to travel around and spend the rest of his life in ease. After we parted ways, he wanted to head east." Yi Jingwen nodded. "Thank you, fellow Daoist Lu. Do you have a specific purpose?" He's probably in the area around Mount Dongmeng. To the left and right of Mount Qingming were Mount Dongmeng and Mount Shimen. The spirit vein was second. There weren't any cultivation groups there, but there were some cultivation clans who opened up that area and either sold or rented it to individual cultivators. Over time, it became an extremely lively market square. Many cultivators went there to trade and exchange goods, and there were even core formation individual cultivators occasionally. Lu Shishan took something out of his robe and gave it to Yi Jingwen. "Before I parted with Yi Jiang, he gave me a sound-transmitting jade talisman. If I'm not too far away, I can use this to send a message to him." Yi Jingwen took the talisman with a happy expression. "Thank you. Fellow Daoist Lu helped me a lot. I don't know how I can properly thank you. With this talisman, it would be much easier to find someone in a crowd." Yi Jiang left a wisp of his divine sense on it so it could directly sense his position. Lu Shishan smiled and said, "I don't dare to say thank you. Just consider it as making friends with fellow Daoist Yi." Upon hearing what he said, Yi Jingwen's evaluation of Lu Shishan increased by a notch. Thinking about it, it was reasonable. Rather than receiving a gift from him today, it would be better to make friends with him. A Shenqing school disciple might be helpful to him in the future. In that case, I'll take my leave first. Fellow Daoist Lu, will meet again if fate wills it. Chapter 25. Yi Jingwen took Mo Tiange and flew towards Mount Dongmeng. After running around with Yi Jingwen these past few days, Mo Tiange had already adapted to the feeling of flying in the sky. Now that she was no longer afraid, she became more and more fond of flying in the sky and gradually felt the carefree feeling of cultivating. How could mortals not be envious of immortals? It was just that she had been troubled by her past in the past, and she was young and naive, so she had never thought about it carefully. Now that she learned of her father's death, she left the home she lived in, and she had seen many methods with Yi Jingwen. She was truly interested in cultivating. Yi Jingwen saw that she wasn't playful like other children and had a calm temperament, so he gave her some pointers. Mo Tiange benefited a lot. For example, on the first day she cultivated beside him, Yi Jingwen corrected her posture when she meditated. She didn't have a teacher by her side when she started cultivating, so she had to rely on her instincts to meditate, so her posture couldn't be considered proper. Soon after, Yi Jingwen corrected some of the small problems she had with her cultivation. Once he explained some things to her, Mo Chenga immediately felt a lot clearer. At the same time, she also felt that having a teacher by her side was indeed much better than fumbling around on her own. If she had to fumble around on her own about the things Yi Jingwen told her, it might take her a month or two to understand them thoroughly. In fact, aura refining disciples and cultivation groups were usually taught by high-level aura refining disciples or foundation building disciples. Yi Jingwen often preached to low-level disciples in Shenqing school, so he saw a lot of stupid people with spiritual roots. Seeing that Mo Chenga could understand everything with just a few pointers, he finally realized that being a teacher could also be relaxed. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Sure enough, in addition to aptitude, perception was also very important. No wonder martial uncle Xianin always said martial uncle Shoujing had an excellent perception, so her achievements were higher than his even though her spiritual roots were inferior. Apart from her spiritual roots, she had other talents. In just a few days the two of them arrived at Mount Dongmeng. This trip greatly broadened Mo Chenga's horizons. Whether it was the small market square at the foot of Mount Qingming or the peaks of Mount Qingming, they were all quiet and gave off a feeling of being detached from the secular world. Mount Dongmeng wasn't like this. There were tall decorated archways and several courtyards at the foot of the mountain. There was also a neatly paved bluestone road up the mountain, and there were squares and streets halfway up the mountain. It was obvious this was the real market square of Mount Dongmeng. The two of them looked over from the sky and could vaguely see many caves on the mountain. However, these caves were covered by green trees, and only a little of them could be vaguely seen. Otherwise, a mountain with so many caves would make one's scalp go numb. The two of them landed on the square. This time no one came to receive them. There were simply too many cultivators coming and going on Mount Dongmeng. At present, the street here was much more lively than the market square on Mount Qingming. Even when they saw someone coming down, they didn't even raise their heads to look at him. Mo Chenga looked left and right. Yi Jingwen was still leading her through the streets and alleys. His gaze was focused as if he was quite familiar with this. After walking a few streets, sure enough, they turned into another shop. Just like the shop on Mount Qingming, the shopkeepers were all Shenqing school disciples. However, this shop was a lot bigger and there were also a lot more shop assistants who were only mortals. These mortals were very perceptive. As soon as they saw them enter, they respectfully stepped forward and greeted the two immortal masters. Mo Chenga was only a child following them, but she didn't fall behind. This obviously showed that this shop assistant was very good at talking. Before Yi Jingwen could say anything, a cultivator wearing Shenqing school disciple uniform came over and respectfully saluted them. He said, "Martial Uncle Yi, why are you here?" Unexpectedly they knew each other. Seeing a cultivator coming to receive them, the mortal shop assistant retreated. Yi Jingwen answered, "I'm here on Martial Uncle Shoujing's order. Where's Senior Martial Brother Zheng?" The disciple answered, "There's a business today. Martial Uncle Zheng personally went to discuss it." Yi Jingwen frowned slightly and muttered, "What business needs Senior Martial Brother Zheng to personally go?" He didn't have to answer. After all, he wasn't a disciple sent here, so he couldn't manage their business. However, thinking that this business wasn't important, the disciple answered, "Martial Uncle doesn't know. It's a cultivation clan that's on the verge of extinction. Martial Uncle Zheng heard that many core formation cultivators came from that clan's ancestors, so they must have good things, so he personally went to discuss it." "Oh, I see." Yi Jingwen wasn't interested in this and asked directly, "Then have you ever seen a person who looks like he's about 50 years old, has a foundation building cultivation level, and his surname is Yi?" The disciple pondered for a long time but eventually shook his head. "Martial Uncle Yi, the characteristics you described are too general. There are many people who look like they're in the foundation building realm. Besides, if they're not important guests, we don't know their surnames." Yi Jingwen also understood this principle. 7 or 8 out of 10 people who were stuck in the foundation building realm were of this age. This was probably because cultivators' appearances changed along with their age. People in their 50s were quite old. If they could make a realm breakthrough, they usually would have done so at this age. Therefore, most people who couldn't make a realm breakthrough were of this age. Yi Jingwen didn't make things difficult for him. He nodded and said, "Then you can go. I'm just asking around. You don't have to entertain me." The disciple saluted him, but before he left, he stopped and said, "Martial Uncle Yi, if you're looking for someone, it'd be better to go to the steward's office at the foot of the mountain. If individual cultivators come here and want to stay for several days or rent an immortal's cave, they'll have to deal with them. This was a good idea. Yi Jingwen thanked the disciple, then took Emo Chenga out again. Once they were outside, Emo Chenga asked, "Big brother Yi, is this also a shop of your Shenqing school?" Yi Jingwen nodded. Yes. Shenqing school has shops in market squares of medium size and above. Most of the market squares in western Kunwu have shops. Disciples who are away from home can go to these shops to ask for help. Oh. Emo Chenga asked again, so, Shenqing school is really big? Yi Jingwen smiled and said, among the 7 great cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole, Tiandao sect is the biggest cultivation group, but Shenqing school isn't bad either. Tiandao sect has 7,000 to 8,000 disciples, and Shenqing school also has 6,000 disciples. They have 7 nascent soul grandmasters while we have 5. Among the other great cultivation groups, only Gujian sect is comparable to us. However, it's harder for sword cultivators to make realm breakthroughs. In terms of nascent soul grandmasters, they're inferior to us. Emo Chenga was puzzled. Why is it harder for sword cultivators to make realm breakthroughs? Yi Jingwen said, sword cultivators specialize in sword cultivation all their lives, and they spend their whole lives studying sword techniques and killing techniques. Therefore, their fighting power is slightly stronger than cultivators like us who mainly cultivate Dao laws. However, it's also because of this that they don't have time to practice cultivation techniques that focus on temperament. Most of their primordial spirits are weaker than ours, so realm breakthroughs are slower. Gujian sect doesn't have fewer disciples than us, but they have 1/5 fewer core formation and nascent soul cultivators than us. He then added, in fact, the cultivation technique I practice is also a sword cultivator, but I'm not a pure sword cultivator, so realm breakthroughs are a bit easier than theirs. Emo Chenga didn't really understand what he said, but she slowly pondered over it. She then followed Yi Jingwen down the mountain and went straight to the heavily guarded courtyards at the foot of the mountain. Chapter 26. In the courtyard at the foot of Mount Dongmeng, Emo Chenga saw Yi Jingwen take out a bag from his robe and throw something out. Immediately, more than a dozen sparkling and translucent jades of different colors appeared on the table. The cultivator in the courtyard became even more attentive. Originally, he clearly said he couldn't disclose information about the tenants, but now he immediately said, Senior, there was indeed such a cultivator who came to rent an immortal's cave not long ago. Please wait patiently. I'll go check it out. Yi Jingwen just nodded without saying anything. The cultivator flicked his sleeve and all the jades on the table disappeared. He then asked the 2 of them to wait for a moment before he hurried into the inner room. Emo Chenga asked in confusion, Big brother Yi, what was that? Why did he agree after you gave it to him? Yi Jingwen said, Did you see spiritual aura on it? Emo Chenga nodded. She didn't think it was strange because everything she saw with Yi Jingwen these days had spiritual aura. How could things in the cultivation world not have spiritual aura? Yi Jingwen said, This is a spirit stone. Spirit stones store spiritual aura and can be used to replenish spiritual aura in battle. They can also be used to lay formations and cultivate. They're indispensable, so we cultivators treat them like gold and silver. Emo Chenga read about them in books, but she never knew what spirit stones looked like. It turned out they were similar to ordinary jades except they contained spiritual aura. Before long, the cultivator came out of the inner room and said very politely to Yi Jingwen, Senior, an individual cultivator named Yi Jiang did come here a month ago and rented an immortal's cave for 3 months. Where? The cultivator said, Senior, go to the square halfway up the mountain and take the path on the left. That immortal's cave is numbered 189. You can just look for it according to the number plate. Yi Jingwen nodded and said, Thank you, then he took Emo Chenga out of the door. People who rented immortals' caves like them had a queue number like inns, so it was easy to leave with a number. Following the cultivator's directions, the 2 of them found the immortal's cave after searching for a while. This immortal's cave was a bit far from the square, and the spiritual aura was also quite ordinary. Obviously, Yi Jiang didn't plan to live here for a long time, or he didn't have anything valuable on him. Is anyone here? Yi Jingwen shouted, but there was no reply for a long time. He pondered for a moment before he took out the summoning talisman Lu Shishan had given him from his bosom. He poured some spiritual energy into it, but he discovered that the jade talisman was still dim and without any light. Yi Jingwen knew that Yi Jiang wasn't here. Emo Chenga asked, Big brother Yi, what happened? Yi Jingwen said, Your uncle isn't here. He's probably quite a distance away from here. That's why the messaging jade talisman can't sense him and can't be sent out. Oh. Mo Chinga couldn't say she was disappointed. In fact, she was a bit nervous. She had never met her father, and her mother had passed away when she was 7 years old. None of her other relatives loved her. She was a little afraid that this uncle did not like her either. Although Yi Jingwen noticed her nervousness, he didn't take it seriously. It was normal for a family member who had never met to depend on each other in the future to be nervous. Unable to find him, the two of them could only turn back. However, now that he knew where he was staying, it would be easier to find him in the future. Before leaving, Yi Jingwen took out an ordinary summoning talisman and left a message at the entrance of the cave. He planned to stay at Xianqing School's shop for a day and come back tomorrow to take a look. On their way back, Yi Jingwen said, "Don't worry. Since we've found the cave, we'll be able to see your uncle soon." In fact, Mo Chenga wasn't worried at all. She still hadn't figured out how to face her new and future-only elder. When they entered the shop, the aura-refining cultivator who gave Yi Jingwen the idea immediately came over. He saluted and asked, "Martial Uncle Yi, did you find him?" Yi Jingwen shook his head. "I only found a place to stay, but I haven't seen him. Are there any vacant rooms here?" "There are. Rest assured, Martial Uncle. Although the spirit veins here aren't as good as those on Mount Taikang, they're not bad either. Even if you stay here for several days, it won't affect you too much. And take me to rest for a while first. If Senior Martial Brother Zheng comes back, tell him." "Yes." Just as the cultivator was about to lead the two of them inside, they heard a voice coming from the door. "Brother Yi, please." Yi Jingwen turned around and saw the shopkeeper, Zheng Xian, and another thin old man. This person had grizzled hair and a deep frown on his face. He was also in the foundation building realm. "Brother Yi?" Before he could think too much, Zheng Xian had already seen him. A pleasantly surprised expression appeared on his face. "Junior Martial Brother Yi, why did you come?" Zheng Xian happened to be a disciple of Clear Spring Peak and was acquainted with Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen also smiled. "Senior Martial Brother Zheng, you're finally back." Seeing that this little junior martial brother of his had something to say, Zheng Xian turned around and smiled at the old man. He cupped his hands and said, "Brother Yi, please go upstairs and sit for a while. I'll be right there." The old man didn't have a smile on his face. He just nodded and followed the other aura-refining disciple upstairs. Yi Jingwen took another look at him. Zheng Xian looked at him with a smile, then looked at Mo Tienga, who was holding his hand. He asked, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, did you go down the mountain to accept a disciple?" Yi Jingwen smiled bitterly. "Senior Martial Brother Zheng, you must be joking. Not to mention that we foundation building disciples don't have the qualifications to accept disciples. I already have a headache dealing with that group of kids in Clear Spring Peak. Why would I want to accept disciples? I came under Martial Uncle Shoujing's order to find someone. I wonder if Senior Martial Brother has heard of this person?" Zheng Xian was also a disciple of Clear Spring Peak, so he was more concerned about his martial uncle's matters. He immediately asked, "Who is it?" "It's an individual cultivator in the foundation building realm. He's about the same age as Senior Martial Brother. His name is Yi Jiang." Right after he finished speaking, Zheng Xian's expression became extremely surprised. Yi Jingwen frowned. "Senior Martial Brother Zheng, what's wrong?" A smile appeared on Zheng Xian's face. "The guest I brought back is indeed called Yi Jiang, but I don't know if he's the one you're looking for." Yi Jingwen was pleasantly surprised. This was really a case of wearing out iron shoes and fruitless searching, only to find the person by chance. He promptly asked, "Is he from Yi clan of Mount Qingming?" "Correct, but the last core formation cultivator of Yi clan has fallen, so they no longer exist." After obtaining this answer, Yi Jingwen became even more certain that this was the person he was looking for. He immediately said, "Senior Martial Brother, please introduce me to him." Zheng Xian smiled and nodded. "Come with me." In the guest room upstairs, the old man stood up when he saw them coming in. Zheng Xian said, "Brother Yi, this is my junior martial brother from the same sect. His surname is also Yi and his name is Jingwen. Junior martial brother, this is Brother Yi Jiang." After the two of them greeted each other, Yi Jingwen went straight to the point. "Fellow Taoist, may I ask if your surname is Yi and your name is Jiang? Are you a cultivator from Yi clan of Mount Qingming?" Yi Jiang didn't understand what was going on, but since Zheng Xian was being so cautious, he answered seriously, "Yes, but Yi clan of Mount Qingming no longer exists." His expression was dejected. Obviously, he was depressed that Yi clan's inheritance had ended in his hands. Yi Jingwen asked again, "Then, fellow Taoist Yi, are you Senior Yi Hai's younger brother? A surprised look appeared on Yi Jiang's face. If someone asked him this question in the past, he wouldn't have been surprised because his elder brother was very famous. Many people in Western Kunwu knew about Yi Hai of Mount Qingmeng. But things were different now. His elder brother went missing on Demonic Mountain 10 years ago, and news of his death was confirmed several days ago. Even Yi clan had disappeared, so how could someone still ask about him? Even so, he still answered with a calm expression, yes. Upon hearing his affirmation, Yi Jingwen heaved a sigh of relief. He pushed Mo Chenga forward and said, Brother Yi, I was ordered by Martial Uncle Shoujing to descend the mountain to look for Senior Yi Hai's descendant and hand him over to you. Chapter 27. Yi Jiang stared at the child in front of him in disbelief. Just now Yi Jingwen said to him, this is Senior Yi Hai's daughter in the secular world. I was ordered by Martial Uncle to pick her up and give her to you. Daughter? He knew his elder brother wandered in the secular world and later went to Demonic Mountain. He didn't have time to explain anything before he died, but he didn't expect his elder brother to leave behind a daughter. Yi Jingwen said, Senior Yi left his last words. I'll give them to Brother Yi now. Yi Jiang hastily took the jade slip and inserted his divine sense into it. Green smoke rose in front of him and turned into a middle-aged scholar. He looked at him and said, Second brother, it seems big brother can't escape this disaster, so I have to tell you some things. On this trip to Demonic Mountain, Master Taoist Shoujing of Shenqing School and I became companions. After I'm done, I'll use my remaining power to help him escape and bring these words to you. To make a long story short, first after I die, Yi clan probably won't be able to stand on Mount Qingmeng. Move out of Mount Qingmeng and focus on preserving your bloodline. When a core formation cultivator appears in the clan, you can take back the spirit vein. Second, use the clan's books and records as much as you can. If you don't have a successor when you die, leave the cultivation technique books and records in the clan. Third, a few years before I went to Demonic Mountain, I actually married a wife and gave birth to a daughter in the secular world. Although that woman was a mortal, she had a purine body. After thinking for a long time, I decided to have children with her. If my daughter happens to inherit her purine body and spiritual roots, she'll be the hope of Yi clan. Unfortunately, before I left, my daughter wasn't born yet, so I don't know if my wish was fulfilled. Fourth, I'll entrust my funeral affairs to Master Taoist Shoujing. He'll deliver my belongings to you. I also asked him to find my wife and daughter. If my wife is still alive, I hope you can treat them well. Fifth, Master Taoist Shoujing made a heart demon oath to me. You can trust him. Mo Chenga timidly looked at the old man in front of her. This man looked like he was in his 50s. His hair was white and he looked like her grandfather. How could he be her uncle? Yi Jiang showed a sorrowful expression. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw Mo Chenga in front of him. This child looked very similar to his eldest brother. He would believe her if she said she was his eldest brother's flesh and blood. With this thought in mind, he stretched out his left palm and pointed with his right hand, forcing a drop of blood from the tip of his finger. With another slash, that drop of blood flew towards Mo Chenga. Mo Chenga was startled. That drop of blood rushed towards her very quickly and eventually disappeared between her eyebrows. She felt her head heating up and was confused for a moment, but she immediately sobered up. She saw this uncle who looked like a grandfather walking towards her. He lowered his head and stroked the spirit-gathering beads on her wrist. He said repeatedly, Yes, this was given to me by the previous generation's core formation ancestor when Big Brother cultivated to the third layer of the aura refining realm. As he spoke, he took a step forward and hugged her tightly, repeatedly saying, Child, poor child, it's really been hard on you. Don't worry, in the future with second uncle here, you won't be helpless anymore. Yi Jiang of Eov, he said and held her and said, Child, what's your name? Although she was unfamiliar with him and wasn't used to relying on a stranger, Mo Chenga didn't push him away. After a long time, Yi Jiang let her go, wiped the tears from his eyes and asked softly, Child, what's your name? I'm Mo Chenga. Mo? Yi Jingwen answered, Brother Yi, you don't know. Senior Yi Hai married into the family in the secular world, so this child took her mother's surname. Oh, I see. Yi Jiang didn't care. We cultivators don't care about these customs. No matter what her surname is, she's our child. That's right. Yi Jingwen hesitated for a moment and said, Brother Yi, you must know the ins and outs. I'm really sorry that this child's mother didn't survive. Yi Jiang shook his head and smiled at him. My elder brother has already explained everything clearly in this jade slip. I still have to thank fellow Taoist Yi for finding my niece. Yi Jiang, thank you. Yi Jingwen hurriedly said with a smile, Brother Yi, it's such a coincidence that we both have the surname Yi, and we have such a fated encounter. How about I be thick-skinned and call you Big Brother? How could Yi Jiang not see that Yi Jingwen was an elite disciple of Shenqing School? He reached the foundation building realm at a young age, so his position in the school must be higher than Zheng Xian, the shopkeeper of Mount Dongmeng. It was also very likely that he would form his gold core in the future. At his age, his chances of forming his gold core were already slim. Yi Jingwen's intention to befriend him must be because of Master Taoist Shoujing. However, this was beneficial to him and his nephew, so he didn't refuse. Brother, since you think so highly of me, I'll accept this Big Brother. Yi Jingwen nodded with a smile. Zheng Xian, who was at the side, laughed and said, Brother Yi, we're really a family now. Since you're friends with martial uncle Shou Jing and you're brothers with my junior brother Yi, there's no need for us to stand on ceremony. Yi Jiang also smiled and nodded while stroking his beard. Then, with an apologetic expression, he said, However, there is one thing that I must ask for Brother Zheng's forgiveness for. Elder brother has given an order and I have just found this niece. Can you allow me to choose a few items from the auction? Of course, of course. Zheng Xian didn't look the least bit annoyed. Instead, he looked very friendly. Brother Yi, you don't have to be so polite. From now on, we'll treat each other as one of our own. Yi Jingwen said to Zheng Xian, Senior Marshal Brother Zheng, I've been with this child for some time, so I've developed some feelings for her. Let me see you off. Zheng Xian was the shopkeeper of the market square, so he naturally had good eyes. He could see that Yi Jingwen had other important things to tell him, so he didn't ask. Of course. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please go. Yi Jingwen and Yi Jiang cupped their hands apologetically, then left with Mo Tiange. Before they left, Yi Jiang held Mo Tiange's hand in a very natural manner and led her to his flying magic tool. Then he said to Yi Jingwen, Brother, let's go to my temporary immortal's cave and have a chat. Yi Jingwen also thought the same, so he said without hesitation, Okay. Yi Jiang's flying magic tool was a horsetail whisk, so it didn't fly very fast. Fast flying wasn't allowed on Mount Dongming, so everyone abided by this rule whenever there were other cultivators. Flying wasn't allowed inside the market square, and they also had to slow down around the market square. The three of them slowly flew east and soon arrived at Yi Jiang's temporary immortal's cave. Yi Jiang waved his hand, closing the cave's defensive formation, and the three of them sat down. This was Mo Tiange's first time seeing an immortal's cave. She saw that everything was either made of stone or jade. The ceiling of the immortal's cave was inlaid with glowing stones, which seemed to be the moonstone Liu Shan took out. Yi Jiang asked her a few more questions. Seeing that she was very interested in the immortal's cave, he told her to go play by herself while he talked to Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen watched Mo Tiange leave and sighed. I won't hide it from Big Brother. These days I really miss Tiange. This child has suffered a lot, so her temperament is much stronger than ordinary children. Upon hearing him praising Mo Tiange, Yi Jiang stroked his beard and said with a smile, I hope this child is a promising talent. By the way, how are her spiritual roots? Upon hearing this question, Yi Jingwen was a bit hesitant. I've already tested her. She has 5 spiritual roots and a purine constitution. I don't know if she's lucky or unlucky. Being able to inherit both spiritual roots and a purine constitution was naturally lucky. However, a purine constitution had 5 spiritual roots. If her spiritual roots were slightly better, she would certainly have extraordinary achievements in the future. What? Yi Jiang was shocked. Did this child really inherit a purine constitution? Originally, he didn't have much hope. Now that he saw that this child was in the second layer of the aura refining realm, he only felt lucky that she had spiritual roots. As for a purine constitution, he didn't have much hope. After all, the probability of that happening wasn't high. Yi Jingwen nodded. Correct. This child only has 5 spiritual roots. Although she was able to cultivate to the second layer of the aura refining realm in the secular world thanks to the spirit gathering pearls, she definitely wouldn't have been able to cultivate to this level without a purine constitution and a good cultivation technique. Upon hearing this, Yi Jiang's heart was filled with mixed feelings. He didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. A purine constitution was a good constitution for cultivation. Unfortunately, this child also had 5 spiritual roots. If she couldn't cultivate, this constitution would cause her to get into trouble. If someone found out about it, Yi Jingwen observed Yi Jiang's expression. Seeing Yi Jiang's gloomy expression, he guessed what he was thinking. He immediately smiled and said, Big Brother, rest assured. Martial Uncle Shoujing gave her a spirit-concealing pendant. As long as she doesn't leave her side, no one will find out. Yi Jiang was a bit surprised, but he soon felt relieved. This was what he was most worried about. Yi Jingwen took out a bag from his robe and handed it to Yi Jiang. He said, "Big brother, this is what your brother left behind. The cultivation technique inside is Yi clan's secret codex. There are also medicinal pills, spirit stones and so on. Presumably the two of you won't be lacking for the time being." Yi Jiang took the bag and said with a grateful expression, "Thank you." When a cultivator passed away, their belongings would be divided among the living. Presumably Master Taoist Shoujing owed them a huge favor, so he sent these things back. Otherwise no one would say anything even if he took them away. In the end, Yi Jingwen said, "Big brother, Martial Uncle Shoujing asked me to ask you, are you willing to join Shenqing school?" This. Yi Jiang didn't expect Master Taoist Shoujing to say this. Normally, Master Taoist Shoujing should have already repaid his debt of gratitude by doing these things, but he actually invited them to join Shenqing school. This was really beyond Yi Jiang's expectations. Yi Jingwen smiled and stood up. "Big brother, think about it carefully. I won't disturb you two uncle and nephew's chat any longer. If you've made a decision, please come to the shop and let me know so I can go back and report." Yi Jiang hastily stood up to see them off. "Yes, I'll think about it carefully. If I've made a decision, I'll tell brother." Chapter 28. Emo Chinga was a bit afraid of this second uncle she'd never seen before. Not only did she not address him, but she also had a guarded expression on her face. But Yi Jiang didn't care. He was already old. He had married and had children before, so his living bloodline was several generations apart. Moreover, they were mortals, so they didn't have any kinship with him. His relationship with his eldest brother had always been very good. Now that he saw Emo Chinga and confirmed that she really had Yi clan's bloodline, he was very excited. After Yi Jingwen left, Yi Jiang carefully asked Emo Chinga about her life in the secular world. Then he excitedly taught her some things about cultivation and gave her a lot of strange things. During the few days she spent with Yi Jingwen, Emo Chinga always saw him taking out strange things from his robe. Sometimes he even took out flying swords and the like, but she couldn't tell what they were. Yi Jingwen said he actually kept a Qingquan bag in his robe and all the things he took out came from it. This made her extremely envious. Now, second uncle had given her one. This Qingquan bag looked like a leather bag. It had a brownish-yellow fur and was smooth to the touch. She didn't know what it was made of, but the opening was snow-white and looked very delicate. Emo Chinga followed second uncle's instructions and inserted a bit of spiritual aura into the bag. Sure enough, her hand smoothly reached into the bag. It was empty, but it had a lot of space. Yi Jiang looked at her with a smile on his face. There was also a bottle. When she pulled the cork off the bottle, rich spiritual aura immediately rushed out. She hastily put it back, then put several things into the Qingquan bag she just got. She raised her head and looked at Yi Jiang with a bit of embarrassment. She whispered, "Second uncle?" Yi Jiang smiled and stroked her head. "You don't need to be so reserved. I'm your second uncle. It's true." Emo Chinga nodded, but she still felt a bit distant. Yi Jiang didn't force her. He gently asked, "Chinga, how did Yi Jingwen treat you on the way here?" Emo Chinga thought for a moment, then answered, "Big brother Yi is very good." "Then do you want to go back to Shenqing school with him?" This? Emo Chinga was hesitant. Yi Jiang said, "I think you don't know, so I'll tell you in detail. If you join a large sect like Shenqing school, there will be many benefits. Not only will you get spirit stones and medicinal pills every month, but if you worship a good master, your cultivation will be greatly improved. Most importantly, with Shenqing school's name, you'll be able to enjoy the shade under a big tree." After a pause, he sighed. Of course, there are also disadvantages. Firstly, in a big sect, the high-level cultivators have their own factions, and the junior cultivators also have their own cliques, so it's not easy to get along with each other. Secondly, the sect rules are very strict and there's a lot less freedom compared to being a loose cultivator. Thirdly, you have a purine constitution and I'm worried that they already have a plan. Emo Chinga also understood that he'd planned this for a long time. Just like the ancestor who passed her cultivation technique to her, when she was ignorant, her future was already decided by others. He then heard Yi Jiang say, "Although your father said in his last words that this Taoist master Shoujing made a heart's devil oath, this matter can't be considered as a violation of the oath. Besides, that Yi Jingwen was so enthusiastic, I have a feeling that this isn't the end." Emo Chinga hesitated for a long time before she finally said, "Second uncle, it's up to you. I have no objections." If it was between Yi Jingwen and second uncle, she would trust second uncle more. After all, this had nothing to do with Yi Jingwen. Yi Jiang muttered to himself for a long time before he came up with an idea. He said, "Chenga, wait here for a moment. Second uncle will be back soon." Yes. Mo Chenga couldn't wait to be alone. She was still unfamiliar with this second uncle of hers, so she still felt somewhat uncomfortable. Yi Jiang took out several jade slips from his bosom and said, "If you're bored, you can use these to pass the time. Second uncle has laid a formation in this cave. Be careful. If you accidentally enter the formation, don't move and wait for second uncle to return." Got it. Mo Chenga took the jade slip. Yi Jiang got up and left the abode. Mo Chenga watched as his silhouette disappeared. She then looked down at the jade slip in her hand. Her divine sense was still very weak, so she could only put the jade slip on her forehead to see the contents inside. Some of these jade slips contained experiences and some contained cultivation techniques. After Mo Chenga looked through them one by one, her attention was attracted by one of the jade slips. The title of this jade slip was very simple. There were only 4 words, the Tao of Formations. The opening said, Heaven and Earth, Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams. If you want to understand formations, you must first understand their meanings. Soon after, it explained the meanings of Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams in detail. To understand formations, one must first be proficient in using Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams. Mo Chenga was fascinated by it. Although Taoist cultivation techniques were mostly interlinked and the art of Sunu she cultivated also had discussions about Yin and Yang, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams, it wasn't as deep as this one. Moreover, the several simple formations listed at the end made her sigh with amazement. After an unknown amount of time, the door of the cave suddenly opened. Yi Jiang walked in with a gloomy expression. Mo Chenga looked up, but before she could greet him, Yi Jiang had already pulled her up. "Chenga, let's go." She was stunned. "Second uncle, what's wrong?" Yi Jiang sneered. "Fortunately, I was careful and secretly listened to what they were talking about." That Zheng Xian asked Yi Jingwen what was going on. Although Yi Jingwen didn't say it, he was sure it was Master Taoist Shoujing who wanted you to join Xianqing school. They obviously have a plot against you. Mo Chenga was speechless upon hearing what he said. Yi Jingwen has been taking good care of me all this time. Could it be that he also harbors evil intentions? Yi Jiang said, "Chenga, quickly pack your things. We'll leave immediately." She originally didn't have anything to pack, so she just asked, "Second uncle, where are we going?" Yi Jiang paused for a moment then sighed. "Kunwu is so big. We'll just go to the east. I don't think they'll be able to find us in a short time. But it's hard on you. You're still so young, yet you have to follow second uncle to wander around." Mo Chenga shook her head. She naturally knew that if it wasn't for her, second uncle wouldn't have anything to plot against. It was only because of her that he was forced to leave. Thinking up to this point, she felt closer to this second uncle of hers. In the end, he was her relative. Others didn't take her seriously, but second uncle was still considerate of her. The uncle and nephew duo quickly packed their things. Yi Jiang also removed the formation he laid at the entrance of the cave. He didn't even refund the extra rent. The two of them quietly left Mount Dongmeng. Mo Chenga watched the cultivators coming and going on Mount Dongmeng under her feet. She clenched her fists then left with second uncle. Perhaps it was because of their innate bloodline connection, but she was more willing to believe in second uncle. She had never hated herself as much as she did now. If it wasn't because of this physique, they wouldn't have had to flee in such a hurry. Second uncle could have joined Xianqing school and cultivated diligently. Perhaps he would have even had a chance of forming his gold core. But now, second uncle had become an individual cultivator and had to take her away from West Kunwu. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to make a realm breakthrough for the rest of his life. Mo Chenga secretly vowed that one day she would build her foundation, form her gold core, and even form her nascent soul like her ancestors. That way she wouldn't need anyone to sacrifice themselves for her and she wouldn't have to be afraid of other people coveting her. This was the true meaning of cultivation for her. Chapter 29. At the southern end of the celestial pole, there was a mountain range known as Kunwu. Kunwu stretched for thousands of miles and was surrounded by endless mountain ranges. Since ancient times, no one had been able to pass through it. Mortals not far from the mountain range could occasionally see dense purple clouds and colorful flashing lights in the mountains. If they went into the mountains to search, they would get lost in the clouds and could only turn back to find the way out. Gradually, people learned that this mountain was an immortal mountain that only immortals could enter. Those immortals came and went with the clouds and mist, looking like immortals. They could call the wind and summon the rain. If they found people with spiritual roots in the mortal world, they would bring them back to the immortal mountain to cultivate. People in the mortal world all hoped to enter the immortal mountain and refine their immortal bones. Unfortunately, spiritual roots were hard to find. Most people had only heard about immortals in legends. Squatting at a roadside stall in the market, a young boy with a childish face was holding a secular book and reading it with great interest. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he frowned, and when he saw something interesting he would laugh out loud, not caring about the looks of others. Fortunately, this was the Immortal Cultivation Market Square under the jurisdiction of Mount Yunwu, a cultivation sect. People coming and going were either cultivators or mortals who were used to such things. If this was in the secular world, this kind of behavior would have already attracted the attention of many people. Xiaotian, what book are you reading? Are mortal books this interesting? A middle-aged Taoist at the stall next to him looked at him with a smile and asked while stroking his beard. The teenager called Xiaotian raised his head and said, "Uncle Huang, this book isn't interesting at all. I just thought it was interesting that those mortals look at us cultivators like this." The teenager put down the book and said, "This book is about an immortal who eliminates evil and helps the weak in the mortal world, robbing the rich to help the poor." Later, the emperor of the secular world wanted to recruit him into the court, but in the end he just left and is free and unfettered in the mortal world. TSK. The teenager shook his head and said, "Immortals don't benefit their cultivation, so why would they enter the secular world? It's clear that mortals have too good of an illusion about immortals." The Taoist surnamed Huang shook his head and said, "Mortals are just daydreaming. How can they imagine the difficulty of cultivation? The immortals that mortals talked about were actually cultivators like them. It was said that when one reached the pinnacle of cultivation, one could ascend to the celestial world and become an immortal. However, this was only a legend. As far as he knew, the highest realm of cultivators was only the deity transformation stage, and that was a matter from 1,000 years ago. That senior had long gone into seclusion, and it was unknown whether he was still alive or not. As for the remaining 4 realms, aura refining, foundation building, gold core, and nascent soul, each was more difficult to advance than the other. In the entire celestial pole, there were only several hundred people who had reached the nascent soul realm. The youth in front of him and Taoist Huang were only chi condensation cultivators. In this market square, there weren't many foundation establishment cultivators, and there weren't any golden core cultivators at all. The two of them sighed. The Taoist looked at his stall and said, "Little Tian, you haven't opened for business today, right?" Speaking of this, the young man sighed, "Before you came, there were people who came to ask, but they said that my things were too expensive. If second uncle wasn't in urgent need of medicinal pills, I would have directly sold them to the shop. It's a pity that the shopkeeper doesn't know what's good for him." On his stall there were a few array discs and array flags. These things could be used to lay formations, which were needed by all cultivators. They could be used to guard against others during cultivation or to gather spiritual aura. However, the path of formations was profound and unfathomable. Even several hundred years of research wouldn't be enough. Cultivators probably didn't have long lives, so there weren't many people who were willing to invest time in this path. Most sects and clans would have formation masters, and it was rare to see one among individual cultivators. Normally, his array discs should be very popular. However, these formations weren't common goods in the cultivation world, and the materials were hard to come by, so the price was very high. He had been on display for several days. From time to time, people came to ask about it, but they all shook their heads and left. Although the formation was good, if they couldn't afford it, they also couldn't sell it. The Taoist surnamed Huang's stall sold low-grade talismans, but they sold much better than Mo Tianga's. After being on display for one day, they were almost sold out. At this time, Taoist Huang hesitated for a while, then asked, "Little Tian, what's the lowest price for your formation?" Uncle Huang, do you want it?" The youth said in surprise. "If you want it, 300 spirit stones are enough." The previous price of this array disc was 400 spirit stones, which was indeed very favorable. Taoist Huang pondered for a while, then happily nodded. "All right, Uncle Huang will take advantage of you." He took out the money he earned from selling talismans today and counted his savings. The two of them handed over the spirit stones in one hand and the formation disc in the other. The youth took out a jade slip from his robe. "Uncle Huang, this is how to set up a formation. As long as you have the main formation flag, you can use this formation to attack and defend." Taoist Huang felt heartache as he handed over the spirit stones. He nodded and said, I just know that the formation made by your uncle and nephew is definitely worth such a high price. If it's someone else, I really wouldn't be able to buy it. Even cultivation group disciples would need several years to accumulate 300 spirit stones, and individual cultivators might need to accumulate it for many years. If Taoist Huang wasn't good at making money, he most likely wouldn't be able to fork out this much money. Uncle Huang, thank you very much. I'm going to buy some medicinal pills. Uncle is still waiting for me. After packing up his stall, the youth went to the shop opened by Mount Yunwu. Although Mount Yunwu was only a small cultivation group in the cultivation world, there were still many clans and individual cultivators who attached themselves to it. Many individual cultivators relied on Mount Yunwu's market square to obtain spirit stones for their cultivation. Mount Yunwu's shop was the largest shop in the market square. When the youth entered the shop assistant greeted him. Fellow Taoist, what would you like? The shop assistant was in the early stage of the aura refining realm. Seeing that the youth was only in the middle stage of the aura refining realm, he was quite polite. The youth said, Do you have 10 small reversion pills? Small reversion pills were healing medicine, so they were quite expensive. When people came to buy them, they usually only bought 1 or 2 pills. 10 pills was already considered a big deal. Upon hearing what the youth said, the smile on the shop assistant's face became even wider. Yes. Please wait a moment. The shop assistant turned around and reported to the shopkeeper. He then took out a jade bottle from behind the counter. These are small reversion pills. Please identify them. The shop assistant removed the bottle stopper and poured out a pill. A medicinal fragrance immediately assailed his nostrils. After carefully smelling it, he nodded and said, These are the pills. There are 10 pills in total. That's a total of 500 spirit stones. If you have any rare items, you can also exchange them. The youth didn't say anything. He just took out the spirit stones from his storage bag and gave them to the shop assistant to count. After carefully putting the medicinal pills into his storage bag, the youth happily walked out of the shop. With these 10 small reversion pills, second uncle's injuries should be healed. After the youth left the shop, he made several turns and arrived at a small courtyard. Soon after, he made a hand seal and the courtyard's door opened. The youth entered the courtyard, pushed open the door and called out, Second uncle? After a long time, a voice came from the corner. Little Tian, you're back. The voice was old and hoarse. An old man sat cross-legged on the bed in the corner. His face was dark green and he looked old. The youth walked over and excitedly took out the jade bottle from his robe. Second uncle, Uncle Huang bought our 5 elements life and death formation. We've collected enough money to buy medicine. Really? The old man forced a smile and took the jade bottle from the youth. He then sighed and said, I told you it's useless, but you still bought it. If you used it to buy aura-nourishing pills, your cultivation level could increase by at least 3 layers and reach the 10th layer. At that time, the Immortals' assembly would be easy, the youth said angrily. Second uncle. The old man stopped talking and looked at him with a sigh. The youth finally smiled. Second uncle, don't worry. Although my cultivation level isn't that high, I've practiced magic for a long time, so I'm also very hopeful. Even so, the old man's expression didn't soften. He only said, If it doesn't work, we'll talk about it next time. Safety is more important. Don't fight recklessly. I know. The most important thing for us cultivators is life. If we can't live forever, what's the point of cultivating? I'll definitely come back safely. The old man finally smiled. It's good that you think that way. There are still 10 days left until the Immortals' assembly. You have to prepare well, especially the way to use spirit tools. This is a way to save your life. And, second uncle, you should heal your injuries first. I'm going to cultivate. Okay, go. The youth left the room and opened the door of the next room. He fetched some water to wash his face and untied his hair to comb it again. A beautiful and bright face was reflected in the mirror. But in the next moment, he tied the hairband again and turned back into a young man. Yi Xiaotian was her current name. The name Imo Chenga shouldn't appear before she formed her gold core. This was second uncle's decision when he left Mount Dongmeng. In the past 7 years, she followed second uncle to wander all over East Kunwu. They picked medicinal plants, opened a shop, and caught beasts. Second uncle's accident happened to the shop when he couldn't keep it open anymore, so he had to catch demonic beasts to make money. In the beginning, Yi clan had a lot of treasures, and Master Taoist Shoujing also returned her father's belongings, so they were quite rich. But the path of cultivation consumed too much, not to mention their spiritual roots weren't good. Second uncle had 4 spiritual roots. He was able to build his foundation thanks to the medicinal pills his father gave him. Mo Chenga, on the other hand, had 5 spiritual roots. Although she had a good cultivation technique, every step she took was difficult. She was able to cultivate to the 7th layer of the aura refining realm in 7 years because of the medicinal pills second uncle gave her. In the past few years, they used up all their spirit stones for cultivation, so they had to think of ways to make more money. Originally, they only went to pick spiritual plants to exchange for medicinal pills, but they found that they couldn't afford to cultivate. Therefore, they used all their savings to open a shop in a small market square. Because the cultivation clan that managed the market square bullied them, they didn't make much money, so they had to close the shop and look for another place. Finally, second uncle found that catching demonic beasts was very profitable, so he teamed up with other cultivators to hunt beasts in the depths of the mountain in the south. One time they accidentally encountered a 5th-rank lightning beast, which was equivalent to a core formation cultivator. Of the 5 of them, 1 died and 4 were injured. Second uncle was injured, so his situation became even more difficult. Not only could he no longer use medicinal pills to cultivate, but he also had to treat second uncle's injuries. Fortunately, Yi clan originally had a deep understanding of formations. Although their spiritual roots weren't good, they were very talented in formations. Uncle and nephew studied formations every day. When Mo Chenga had free time, she would set up a small stall and sell them in exchange for medicinal pills and so on. Second uncle always said that if she continued like this, she wouldn't be able to build her foundation. Therefore, a year ago they came to Mount Yunwu with the intention of entering Yunwu's sect through the Immortals Assembly. In this way the sect would have its own benefits and she would be able to relax a lot. The so-called Immortals Assembly was a method for individual cultivators like them to join a cultivation group. Most individual cultivators didn't have good spiritual roots, and these cultivation groups only accepted disciples with at least 3 spiritual roots. Only cultivators from cultivation clans that had a good relationship with the cultivation group could join with 4 spiritual roots. Individual cultivators like them obviously couldn't do that. However, even if their spiritual roots weren't good, there were always some people who got lucky and made rapid progress in their cultivation. The purpose of this Immortals Assembly was to select these cultivators with potential to join a cultivation group. As for the method of selection, it was simply a competition in the ring. Once they went on the ring, life and death didn't matter. Although most cultivation groups had core formation cultivators to keep watch, they couldn't guarantee that there would be no casualties. Sometimes the fights were fierce and there were even tragedies where both sides perished together. Mo Chenga naturally didn't want to learn from them and risk her life. Although she followed second uncle all these years as a vagrant, it broadened her horizons. Second uncle also treated her very well, and the 2 of them depended on each other for survival. She also walked out of the shadow of her childhood, and her temperament became a lot more cheerful. She firmly remembered what second uncle said. The goal of cultivation was to live a long life, and life was the most important thing. Besides, she didn't think her life would be over if she couldn't enter a cultivation group. Second uncle said that her father also built his foundation and formed his gold core on his own. It was because of him that Yi clan was able to survive on Mount Qingming for another 200 years. Since her father could do it, she could also do it. Having made up her mind, she sat on the bed and began today's cultivation. Chapter 30. Mo Chenga finished running her great circulatory cycle and withdrew her spiritual aura. She then opened her eyes, preparing to practice spells. Ever since she entered the middle stage of the aura refining realm, she didn't only practice the art of Sunu. Second uncle said that although this technique was brilliant, it didn't have a way to deal with enemies in the early stage. Moreover, it was easy for people to see through it. Cultivators from big cultivation groups didn't care, but individual cultivators like her had to fight from time to time, so it was better for her to learn some practical spells. After her realm stabilized, second uncle gave her the Greenwood incantation. This incantation was part of the Yi clan's collection. Ordinary disciples with wood spirit roots all practiced this incantation. Firstly, this incantation could be practiced until the core formation realm, which was enough for ordinary cultivators. Secondly, this incantation was exceptionally powerful in fights of magical power. In the past few years, Mo Chenga had become proficient in using this art for the sake of the Immortals Assembly. Now that she had finished practicing the art of Sunu, she began to practice the spells of the Greenwood art. With a flip of her palm, several unknown seeds appeared in her hand. With a flick of her fingers, those seeds fell at the foot of the table. They quickly sprouted and grew into thorns, firmly entangling the table. Emo Chinga looked at the thorns and shook her head. If she wasn't fast enough, the table wouldn't move, but the person would. Soon after, she condensed a small fireball on her fingertip. She threw the fireball at the thorns, quickly burning them to ashes, but the table's legs weren't damaged at all. This was the result of her 2 years of practice. She could control her spiritual aura to a subtle level so she could burn anything she wanted. It could be said that it was an enhanced effect of Li Yushan's technique of burning a wall without damaging it. Using the greenwood art to use seeds to cast the entanglement technique and fire spirit technique to control the enemy was the technique she came up with. Soon after, she practiced for a while. When she saw that the sky was bright, Emo Chinga got up, washed up, and went out to get some food. Cultivators in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm could abstain from eating, and cultivators in the foundation building realm could be free from dirt. She was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, so she still needed to eat and bathe. Basically, she was still a mortal. Therefore, it was an unwritten rule in the cultivation world that aura refining cultivators couldn't perform closed-door meditation for too long. After all, if you performed closed-door meditation for several months, you'd come out with a sore back and dirty body. Emo Chinga had never eaten fasting pills. First, although fasting pills were cheap, they were still medicinal pills. Second, how could fasting pills compare to real food? Although the mortal world's fire and smoke would increase the body's impurities, spirit beasts would not have to worry about this problem. Furthermore, it would increase the body's spiritual energy by a small amount. Although there weren't many spirit beasts capable of fighting, other beasts that had absorbed spiritual aura could be found everywhere. After all, this was the Kunwa mountain range. He walked out of the door and headed towards the dense forest behind the market. Every cultivator loved to eat fasting pills because they thought there would be impurities after they entered the world. Not everyone knew that eating spiritual beasts and spiritual plants wasn't a problem, and how could mortals dare to eat spiritual beasts? Because of that, Emo Chinga never had to worry about food. She just needed to casually go to this forest and catch a bird or pheasant. Once she entered the forest, she immediately saw a fat spiritual rabbit jumping around. Emo Chinga was delighted. Speaking of delicious, rabbits were still the best. However, rabbits had too many natural enemies, so they were rarely seen. Emo Chinga threw a seed, which immediately turned into an entanglement technique and firmly bound the rabbit. The rabbit panicked, but Emo Chinga waved her hand. A wind blade flew past and the rabbit fell to the ground. She walked over, picked up the rabbit, and threw it into her Chinkuan bag. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to kill it if she caught it, so she always killed it first before picking it up. Second uncle always said she wasn't ruthless enough. The cultivation world was full of dangers. Merely advancing to the inner demon couldn't stop some people from doing bad things. After all, inner demons would only appear when one advanced to the core formation realm. There were hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the celestial pole, but there were only a few thousand core formation cultivators. What happened to Li Yushan when she was a child and later when she was forced to leave Mount Dongmeng made her realize that she must have great strength and be unafraid of blood. In order to protect herself, she even had to kill the other party first, just like Yi Jingwen. When he realized Li Yushan had bad intentions, he directly killed him without so much as a frown. However, even though she knew this, she still wasn't used to it. Perhaps only after experiencing blood could she slowly get used to killing. After catching a rabbit, she picked some wild vegetables and weeds in the forest. Just as she was about to stand up and go back, she suddenly sensed 2 breaths approaching her, causing her to stop. There were 2 sets of footsteps, which meant there were 2 people. This place only had some common beasts and plants with spiritual aura. Normally, no one would come here, so why were there 2 people coming here all of a sudden? Unable to suppress her curiosity, she curbed her breath and crouched behind a shrub, peeking through the gaps between the leaves and grass. Sure enough, there were 2 people. She saw 2 pairs of feet. One was wearing black boots while the other was wearing embroidered shoes. Apparently they were a man and a woman. The man's footsteps stopped first. He then said softly, "Little Sister Lien, there should be no one here." The woman didn't answer. Emo Chinga moved slightly and finally saw the whole picture. She saw a young cultivator, a man and a woman, looking at each other with eyes full of tenderness. Their hands were tightly clasped together. It was obvious that they were very amorous. Emo Chinga suddenly felt so regretful that she wanted to bang her head against the wall. This was clearly a young couple looking for a place to have a rendezvous. Emo Chinga didn't look over there. She crouched down and hesitated. It was obviously inappropriate to go out now. Among these 2 people, the man was in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm like her while the woman was in the 6th layer. If it wasn't because she practiced the art of Sunu and her breath-concealing divine sense was stronger than theirs, she would have been discovered long ago. If she went out now, they would think she harbored bad intentions. Moreover, if their tryst was discovered, they would most likely teach her a lesson. She didn't want to be beaten up for no reason. Just as she was regretting her actions, the man spread his robe on the ground and unexpectedly hugged little sister Lien, intending to do something improper. When Emo Chinga realized this, she turned pale with fright. She thought they were just a couple looking for a place to be lovey-dovey. Who would have thought they actually wanted to? Based on the sounds coming from the other side, the two of them were obviously hugging and kissing each other. Little sister Lien took the time to say, "Be careful of your clothes." The man uttered an N, but didn't stop. The two of them took off their clothes and went straight to the main topic at an extremely fast speed. Emo Chinga suddenly had the urge to bury herself when she heard the raging fire and dry firewood on the other side. She had been disguised as a man for many years. Usually, if she wasn't concentrating on cultivating, she was studying the Tao of formations with second uncle. She didn't understand these matters between men and women at all. Therefore, she felt extremely embarrassed at this moment. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look in that direction. After an unknown amount of time, the sounds on the other side gradually calmed down. The man said, "Little sister Lien, there's only 1 month left until the Immortals' Assembly. How are your family's preparations?" Little sister Lien's voice was so soft that it seemed water could drip out of it. She said in a sweet voice, "It's not easy to see each other, yet you're asking about these things." The man hastily coaxed her. "Doesn't that mean I want to enter Yunwu's sect with you? If we enter the sect, our family won't be able to control us anymore. At that time, we can become dual cultivation partners and live together." Little sister Lien was a bit hesitant. "I actually have some confidence." The man said, "Some? What kind of treasure did your family give you?" Little sister Lien smiled but didn't answer. Emo Chinga was curious, so she once again peeked through the bushes. She saw a naked man and a woman tangled together, their bodies only covered with some clothes. She silently told herself to ignore them several times in her heart before she looked at their appearances again. Both of them were about 20 years old. The man was quite handsome and the woman was also gentle and lovely. It was no wonder from what they said that they were actually dating without their family's knowledge. Beauty was really harmful. The man hugged little sister Lien and repeatedly coaxed her. "Good little sister Lien, just tell me. Otherwise I really won't feel at ease." Perhaps the concern in his voice moved little sister Lien because she said, "Father gave me the enchanting lantern. Presumably, no matter who my opponent is, I'll have some confidence." Although her tone sounded humble, it was actually very confident. Emo Chinga was very curious. What was this enchanting lantern? Why was this woman so confident? In the Immortals' Assembly, there were 10th layer aura refining cultivators, but most of them were 7th layer aura refining cultivators like Emo Chinga, which was the peak of the middle stage of the aura refining realm. This woman was only in the 6th layer of the aura refining realm, so her cultivation level could be considered low, yet she actually thought she'd have some confidence no matter who her opponent was. The man said, "I see. Then I don't have to worry anymore. Little sister Lien, you'll definitely enter Yunwu's sect. At that time The unfinished meaning in his words made little sister Lien blush again. The man moved closer to her and the two of them started to become intimate again. Emo Chinga withdrew her gaze, but she was somewhat puzzled. Just now, she seemed to have seen a flash of killing intent in this man's eyes. Was she mistaken? Chapter 31. Before he could think of anything else, he heard the woman scream out in pain. Emo Chinga hurriedly moved closer to take a look and couldn't help but be shocked. She saw that the man was firmly holding little sister Lien in his arms. His right hand was holding a dagger-like spirit tool which was inserted into little sister Lien's back. The half-naked man and woman, the bloody dagger, the woman's frightened expression, and the man's distorted face. Emo Chinga covered her mouth and nose, not daring to breathe. It was obviously a lover's tryst, but she didn't expect it would turn into this. Big Brother Ming. What? The man snorted and sneered. Do you think I'm really interested in you? It's just a honey trap. The woman widened her eyes. Hesitation, remorse, and anger intertwined in her eyes. Coupled with her distorted face due to pain, she looked even more frightening. You, based on your looks, you're just SOSO, and you're also a quadruple spiritual root. Do you think I'll fall for you? It's just because you're the only successor of Huang clan's younger generation. After I kill you and get your family heirloom, the enchanting lantern, how could your Huang clan be an opponent for my clan? The woman's eyes showed understanding, and the despair in her eyes deepened. At this moment she couldn't say anything. She just stared at her lover with widened eyes and gradually lost her breath. From these words, Mo Chenga managed to glean some information. Huang clan and Yin clan were both small cultivation clans relying on Yunwu sect. The two clans were said to have been enemies for generations. Presumably, Yin clan came up with this treacherous plan to eliminate Huang clan. After confirming the woman in his arms was no longer breathing, the man pulled out the dagger from her back and pushed Qi Yan's corpse away in disgust. He wiped the blood on the dagger and stood up to tidy his clothes. Mo Chenga didn't dare to make a sound. This man was so treacherous that he killed his female companion when they were intimate. It was obvious he was an extremely evil person. If he found out, he definitely wouldn't let her go. After putting on his clothes, the man crouched down and rummaged through the woman's clothes. Finally he found a Chenkuan bag. He easily broke the divine sense left by its master and poured out everything. There was a pile of women's clothes, spirit tools, talismans, jade bottles for storing elixirs, jade boxes that seemed to be used for storage, and so on. The man immediately saw what he was looking for. He picked up a lantern from among the spirit artifacts and said happily, "It really is here." Mo Chenga was also very curious about this colored glass lamp. She didn't know what kind of powerful function it had, but from what she saw, it seemed like an ordinary colored glass lamp. Aside from the spiritual aura it carried, she really couldn't see anything special about it. The man put everything back into the Chenkuan bag and put it away in his bosom. With a flick of his finger, a cluster of flames fell on the woman's corpse, immediately igniting a raging fire. The firelight shone on his rather handsome face, making him look gloomy and terrifying. Mo Chenga only hoped that he would quickly destroy the corpse and erase the evidence so that she could escape. When she was 10 years old, she saw Yi Jingwen kill Li Yushan with a single sword strike. Later on, she followed second uncle to roam eastern Kunwu and often encountered dangerous situations. Second uncle never showed mercy to anyone who harbored evil intentions. But there had never been a time when she was so frightened. This man's killing methods were really too despicable. A moment ago the two of them were still being affectionate, skin to skin, but in the next moment he actually took advantage of their intimate moment to stab his lover in the back. Looking at the man's face under the fire, Mo Chenga felt nauseous. It was clear that in the cultivation world, even feelings weren't reliable. This definitely wasn't the only case of lovers killing each other. All of a sudden, the corner of her eyes blurred. She reacted extremely quickly and dodged to the side. She saw a streak of flames rush past her original position and hit a shrub. Then she heard the man's cold voice. "Who? I've been discovered." Since things had reached this point, Mo Chenga only needed to think for a moment before she took all the seeds in her Chenkuan bag. With his other hand he used the wind breath technique on his palm. A wind blade shot out and sliced at a shrub not far away. The shrub swayed for a moment, and then a fiery light shot towards the shrub that was swaying. Taking advantage of the time when the man's attention was drawn, she moved slightly and floated several feet away in an instant. She stealthily peeked through the shrub and saw that the man was fiercely staring in the direction where she shot the spell. Fortunately, he didn't discover her hiding place. Mo Chenga couldn't think of any way to escape. This man was obviously a vicious and merciless person. Her cultivation level was also the same as his, so it was impossible for her to escape without making a sound. She clenched her teeth. The only thing she could do now was to fight with her life on the line. Killing wasn't uncommon for her. In the past few years she had followed second uncle and encountered many dangerous situations. However, second uncle had built his foundation many years ago and Yi clan also had a rich collection, so second uncle's spells were powerful and his magic tool was also a high-grade one, so he didn't need her help. As for this man, he obviously wasn't a good person. It probably wasn't his first time killing people and robbing their treasures. Even though she practiced the art of Sunu and her spiritual power was much purer, she still didn't have the confidence to kill him. Since the man couldn't find her, he slowly walked towards the shrub. Fortunately, he wasn't heading in Mo Chenga's direction. However, he would be able to find her after a short search. Mo Chenga no longer hesitated. The moment he approached, she lightly flicked a seed towards him. In the forest, using things like seeds was indeed advantageous. She was also much more skilled in using spiritual aura compared to cultivators in the same realm as her, so she flicked the seed very lightly and was very difficult to detect. As soon as the man approached, the seed immediately expanded and turned into thorns, madly wrapping around the man's body. The man turned pale with fright and hastily brandished the spirit dagger in his hand. This dagger was presumably not an ordinary item. Before the thorns could wrap around the dagger, they were already cut into pieces. Since her hiding place was already exposed, Mo Chinga took advantage of the man's confusion and immediately retreated. Soon after, she threw another handful of seeds at him. The man had already figured out her appearance. He glared at her fiercely, but he didn't dare to hesitate. He quickly retreated while using the dagger to cut down the plants that approached him. This attack method could be said to be a special feature of Yi clan's Greenwood art. Since she made her move, Mo Chinga was determined to kill him. Otherwise, her identity would definitely be exposed. In this situation, it was either you die or I die. She clenched her teeth and took out the talismans she prepared for the Immortals' assembly. She slapped one of them on her body and a defensive barrier immediately appeared and enveloped her. She then threw the other talismans at the man. The man was suddenly attacked. Mo Chinga didn't give him a chance to catch his breath, so he couldn't fight back and could only defend. He had just obtained the enchanting lantern, so he hadn't removed the remnant divine sense on it to refine it for his own use. Since he couldn't use it, he was very anxious. Amidst the overwhelming number of talismans, Mo Chinga waved a stack of talismans with seeds in them and threw them out. During this gap, the man only had time to cast a spell before he was once again stunned by Mo Chinga's talismans. However, Mo Chinga didn't dodge his spell at all. The defensive barrier on her body had already blocked it. She just kept throwing seeds and talismans at him. The man dodged and blocked the talismans. Just when he felt that there was something wrong with the talismans this time, he heard a bang. He had ignored the seed in the talisman and it smashed into his hand. However, it suddenly grew into a ball and suddenly exploded. It directly blew up the defensive barrier on his body. At this moment, several more talismans flew towards him. Ah! With a blood-curdling scream, the man was sent flying backwards. Mo Chinga immediately took out a wooden sword and swung it. The wooden sword directly pierced through the man's body. The man let out another groan. His heart was pierced through and he no longer moved. After standing in a daze for a while, Mo Chinga regained her composure and found that her head was full of cold sweat. This was the first time she killed someone with her own hands. Only now did she realize that her heart was beating like a drum and her steps were light. She couldn't help but laugh at herself. She couldn't kill people without blinking. It was obvious that she was still far from being a qualified cultivator. However, she was very happy to escape with her life. She wiped the sweat on her forehead and cautiously approached the man. After confirming that he was really dead, she retrieved the sword from his body and immediately started to destroy the corpse. She did what the man did just now. She retrieved the 2 Qinghuan bags from his body and burned the man's corpse with a snap of her fingers. This man just killed his lover and burned his corpse here. Now he also died here in the same way. Mo Chinga didn't know whether this was retribution or not. Now, the two of them could be said to be born in different worlds but die in the same hole. After the corpse was completely burned and there were no traces left, Mo Chinga hurriedly went back. They had a private meeting, so no one should know about it on the woman's side, but it might not necessarily be the case on the man's side. She cautiously made a big circle and hid for a while before going out from the other side. Chapter 32. Nothing unusual happened along the way, so Mo Chinga returned to her rented courtyard and immediately went to second uncle's room. Yi Jiang was startled by her appearance. "Xiaotian, what's wrong?" Mo Chinga said in a trembling voice. "Second uncle, I killed someone." Yi Jiang was startled, but he soon calmed down and said, "So be it. You have to get used to it. Otherwise, how can you continue on this path?" After he finished speaking, he asked worriedly, "Who did you kill? Did someone rob you?" "No." Mo Chinga shook her head. Mo Chinga shook her head. Seeing how calm second uncle was, she also gradually calmed down and told him what happened just now. Yi Jiang frowned and thought for a moment before asking, "Did you leave any traces at the scene? Did anyone see you on your way back?" Mo Chinga shook her head. "I cleaned it up. Even if someone found the place, they wouldn't find any clues. I circled around on my way back but no one saw me." Yi Jiang calmed down. "It's fine. They won't know you killed them if they can't find any clues. Besides, there's still second uncle. Although he's half dead, he's still a genuine foundation-building cultivator. The 2 clans you mentioned are only small clans. Even if they can't defeat them, they can always run away." Mo Chinga also calmed down after hearing someone comforting her. She then remembered the 2 men's Qinghuan bags and took them out. "Second uncle, that man killed them for some enchanting lantern. I brought it back. Can you see what's so special about it?" Unlike Mo Chinga, Yi Jiang frowned as soon as he saw the enchanting lantern. After a long time he finally said, "The enchanting lantern is indeed an ancestral treasure of the Huang clan. It's said to be a magic weapon. Once this lantern is summoned, a maze will appear within 100 feet radius. However, this lantern is a magic weapon, and magic weapons can only be used by core formation cultivators. Even if aura refining cultivators manage to use it, it won't be very powerful. Since the death of the Huang clan's core formation cultivator, no one has been able to use its full power." He then looked at her with a smile. "Since you obtained it, it's also a fated chance. However, it's not appropriate to take it out for the time being. Put this enchanting lantern away and refine it in secret." Mo Chinga's original intention in killing that man wasn't to snatch his treasure. It was simply because all fights of magical powers were like this and she also learned from them. Because of that, she didn't feel it was a pity. She just uttered a yes, then put the enchanting lantern away. Mo Chinga suddenly remembered something and asked, "Second uncle, I was anxious today and used most of the talismans I had. The Immortals Assembly is next month. What should I do?" Yi Jiang was also helpless as he said, "It's your first time facing an enemy alone, so you really don't have any experience. That's why you panicked." However, fortunately, this brat surnamed and has a few powerful spirit weapons in his Qingkuan bag. It's just that he didn't have the time to take them out because of your talismans. Otherwise, you wouldn't have killed him so easily today. Mo Chinga was suddenly enlightened. No wonder she only felt nervous and didn't feel it was difficult to deal with him. It turned out it was because she was lucky. That man didn't have the chance to take out his powerful spirit tool and died because of her talismans. Otherwise, she would have been in danger today. Yi Jiang pondered for a long time before he said, "The talismans on these two people can also make up the numbers. All talismans are the same. You can just use them and not be afraid of being discovered. Tomorrow you can use your remaining spirit stones to buy some more. I reckon the number won't be too far off." In addition, second uncle recently comprehended a new spirit trapping formation that can be temporarily laid. In the next few days you should practice more. With the help of the formation, you'll definitely have a much easier time. Soon after, he sighed and said, "If you can't do it this time, don't force yourself. At worst, you can try somewhere else. You're still young." Mo Chinga also knew second uncle felt the most important thing was to keep her life. Aura refining cultivators could live up to 200 years old, but she was only 17 years old. Her future was still unknown, so it wasn't worthwhile to throw her life away like those cultivators. "Alright, go back and think about what you did wrong in today's fight. Maybe it'll be useful at the Immortals Assembly. You also have to adjust your spiritual power. Before the Immortals Assembly, your whole body has to be in its best state." Mo Chinga nodded. She no longer disturbed second uncle's recuperation and went back to her room. Having just experienced killing people, she wasn't in the mood to make something to eat. She first circulated her qi and adjusted her breathing to replenish the spiritual aura she consumed. Then she cultivated until morning before she opened her eyes to check the two people's Qingkuan bags. First, she saw the woman's Qingkuan bag. There were only a few talismans inside. Mo Chinga swept her gaze over them and was shocked. Although there were only a few, they were high-grade talismans for aura refining cultivators. This talisman was more useful than 10 low-grade talismans. Mo Chinga was overjoyed. The reason why she had so many talismans was because she bought them for the Immortals Assembly. However, high-grade aura refining talismans could only be made by foundation-building cultivators, so the market price wasn't cheap. Second uncle was injured, so he couldn't make talismans himself. The two of them didn't have many spirit stones, so they could only buy low-grade talismans. They couldn't afford high-grade talismans. Mo Chinga counted 5 talismans in total. 3 of them had the fire attribute and 2 had the water attribute. Talismans weren't like spells. They weren't limited by spiritual roots and could be activated with just a little spiritual aura. Aura refining cultivators couldn't do without talismans in fights of magical power, but they were limited by their financial resources. Those who could use a lot of talismans were mostly disciples of cultivation groups or clans. Mo Chinga's talismans had been around for a long time. However, with these 5 high-grade talismans, the ones she lost weren't a big deal. She only used about 40 to 50 talismans, so these talismans were completely replenished. She then looked at the other things. There were several pretty good spirit tools, but they weren't comparable to the enchanting lantern. Moreover, they had to be refined before they could be used, and she was afraid they'd be recognized if she took them out. Besides, she already had a greenwood sword. Second uncle said it was once used by her father and was later refined again. She didn't need to change spirit tools before she reached the foundation building realm. After all, spirit tools had to be nourished and refined for a long time before they could be used easily. In addition, there were several bottles of various kinds of medicinal pills, all of which were commonly used by aura refining cultivators. What made Mo Chinga happy was that there was a bottle of aura-nourishing pills. She happened to be short of medicinal pills. There was also a bottle of look-preserving pills. That woman probably spent a lot of money to buy them. One pill could preserve a person's youth for 10 years. However, Mo Chinga didn't need them. Not to mention she was only 17 years old. The art of Sunu originally had the effect of preserving one's youth and could even make a woman more beautiful. There were also several jade boxes. They seemed to contain some kind of spiritual plants, but she didn't recognize them. Next, there were the man's belongings. They were mostly spirit tools, medicinal pills, talismans, and clothes. Obviously, the Yin clan was better off than the Huang clan. Although they didn't have many talismans and they weren't high grade, their spirit tools and medicinal pills were much better than the woman's. There was even a bottle of aura-converging pills. Aura-converging pills were the best medicinal pills for aura-refining cultivators to consolidate their foundation and nourish their primordial aura. Their effects were several times better than aura-nourishing pills. Ordinary aura-refining cultivators wouldn't be able to afford them unless they were proud disciples of a cultivation group or had a high-level cultivator as an elder. Mo Chinga happily put away her belongings. Suddenly, she discovered a large bead among them. It looked like a pearl that contained spiritual aura. She tried to inject spiritual aura into it, but it was completely different from her spirit-gathering bead. There seemed to be a layer of something that isolated spiritual aura from the outside, making it impossible for her to inject it. In any case, she already had enough things today, so she didn't mind. She put the useless clothes into a chenkuan bag and the useful ones into her own chenkuan bag. After tossing and turning, she was really hungry. The rabbit and wild vegetables she hunted yesterday were still there, so she moved the pots and bowls from the corner of the room. She scooped some water from the water jar outside and washed the pots and bowls. She also cleaned the rabbit, wild vegetables, and mushrooms before stewing them in one pot. Of course, this stewing wasn't the method of stewing in the mortal world. She used magic. When she was a child, she cooked for herself. Later, when she lived in the ancestral house, she often took advantage of the fact that Aunt Lin wasn't around to secretly cook for her in the middle of the night. Therefore, after she found out spiritual beasts could be eaten, she decided to cook for herself. At first, second uncle didn't approve of her cooking. He believed that cultivators shouldn't be greedy for good food. However, after he tasted it himself, he discovered that the impurities it added were negligible, so he let her do as she pleased. After a while, Mo Chinga gave half of the pot to second uncle. After eating and drinking to her heart's content, she still felt somewhat restless, so she decided to go out and scout around. Chapter 33. Mo Chinga went to the place where she usually set up her stall. Sure enough, she saw Taoist Huang there and greeted him, "Uncle Huang." Taoist Huang was very happy to see her. "Xiaotian, I haven't seen you for several days. Why didn't you come out to set up your stall?" Mo Chinga said, "It's because of the Immortals Assembly, so I probably won't come out for a while." Taoist Huang nodded in understanding. "You're right. This is a big deal. Hey, how are your preparations?" "It's the same. For individual cultivators like us, we never have enough things." Her words made Taoist Huang sigh. "Yes, we can't compare to the children of cultivation clans. We can ignore other chores and focus on cultivation. We can't lack spirit tools, talismans, and spirit stones." Mo Chinga was silent when it came to this topic. If her father hadn't met with an accident and second uncle hadn't been forced to give up the clan, she probably wouldn't have to spend so much time on chores. Taoist Huang comforted her. "Xiaotian, if you lack talismans, I'll give you a discount. If you don't have enough spirit stones, it's okay. You can take them first." Mo Chinga was rather moved by his words. In fact, she didn't have a deep friendship with Uncle Huang. They just talked a lot because they had been doing small business together for the past 2 years. Uncle Huang's spiritual roots weren't good, and his cultivation level was only in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. He was getting older and had no hope of advancing, so he spent most of his time doing business, hoping to save some spirit stones for his descendants. They were all struggling young aura refining cultivators in the cultivation world, and none of them had it better than the other. It was really rare that Uncle Huang was willing to help them in this situation. "No need, Uncle Huang. You can't earn much by selling talismans, so how can I take advantage of you? Besides, individual cultivators like us don't live like this. We have much more fighting experience than the children of those aristocratic clans." Mo Chinga said this with a bit of a guilty conscience. Although she was also an individual cultivator, she had a foundation building elder, so she didn't have much fighting experience. However, second uncle would tell her a lot about his experience. Daoist Huang nodded in agreement. Yes, although the children of those aristocratic clans have their elders to guide them, they can't understand fighting with just a few words. Mo Chinga felt even more guilty. Remembering her purpose of coming out, she hurriedly changed the topic. By the way, Uncle Huang, I haven't been out for 2 days. Is there any news? News? Daoist Huang thought for a moment and said, Oh, it's news from the Immortals Assembly, right? Recently, there are more and more people coming here. Look at the street, there are many young cultivators. I guess they are here to participate in the Immortals Assembly. Only now did Mo Chinga notice that there were indeed a few more people here compared to 2 days ago. The closer the Immortals Assembly was, the more people would come. Many individual cultivators who failed to be selected by other cultivation groups would also come to try their luck. In addition, there were also cultivator clans from various regions, so the number of people who came from outside was actually much higher than before. More people means more disputes. Yesterday, Mo Chinga heard that the life lanterns of the most promising juniors from Huang clan and An clan, which were both dependent on Yunwu sect, had been extinguished. Furthermore, their corpses couldn't be found. Now both clans were blaming each other for their deaths. Little Tian, you also have to be careful, there might be people with bad intentions. Mo Chinga was startled. As it turned out, this matter was already exposed. On the surface, however, he pretended to be very surprised. Really? Daoist Huang didn't notice her abnormality. He just shook his head and said with a sigh, this kind of thing is too normal. Every time the Immortals Assembly approaches, it's not only the competing cultivation clans, but also many individual cultivators who encounter this kind of thing. Although we cultivators preach Dao Heart, inner demons are something that can only be encountered when one advances to the gold core formation realm. How could these people have the time to care about something that doesn't even exist? Mo Chinga felt a bit relieved. It was fine as long as she wasn't suspected. When she saw someone stopping in front of her stall, she smiled and said, Uncle Huang, you can continue with your business. I'm going to buy some things and prepare. Okay, go ahead, Daoist Huang answered and promptly went to greet the customer. The Immortals Assembly was a good opportunity to make money. Mo Chinga left the stall with a heavy expression. She carefully recalled everything again to make sure she didn't leave any clues behind and that no one saw her leave. Although she rationally believed she was safe, she still couldn't help but feel a bit anxious in her heart. In the end, she still wasn't calm enough. She told herself over and over again to calm down a bit. Although she came out to inquire about information, she still had other things to do. Once she calmed down, she went to the biggest shop on Mount Yunwu. Although it wasn't a big cultivation group like Shenqing School, the goods in Yunwu sect's shop were quite complete. Basically, anything could be bought. Mo Chinga didn't waste any time and directly asked the shop assistant, Do you have 20 restorative panaceas? She was also a regular customer here and often came to buy medicinal pills, so the shop assistant was very enthusiastic. He said, Yes. Fellow Daoist, please wait a moment. He then turned around and took out a relatively large jade bottle from the counter. He carefully counted 20 pills and put them into a small jade bottle before handing it to her. Fellow Daoist, take a look. Is there any problem? He was counting them in front of her, and the quality of the medicinal pills was also pretty good. Mo Chinga nodded, took the medicinal pills and paid the spirit stones. Although the man and woman from yesterday didn't have a lot of spirit stones, it was enough for her to buy these. Speaking of which, robbery was indeed a good profession. The two of them, uncle and nephew, might as well kill 2 aura refining cultivators by accident while working hard. Of course, it was just a thought. If she was like those people who only cared about a moment of pleasure and didn't care about the consequences of not being able to form her gold core, she definitely wouldn't be so short-sighted. After buying the medicinal pills, Mo Chinga didn't linger and walked out of the shop. She didn't need magic tools and she really didn't have any extra spirit stones to buy talismans. After thinking about it, what she lacked the most was still restorative panaceas. The competition at the Immortals Assembly was fierce. If she encountered a strong enemy, her spiritual aura would definitely be depleted. At that time, it would be a competition to see who had more restorative panaceas and spirit stones. Although spirit stones could also replenish spiritual aura, their effects weren't as good as restorative panaceas. Elixirs were too important for cultivation. Most of the spirit stones that the uncle and nephew earned were spent on elixirs. Mo Chinga once thought about learning pill concocting, but second uncle vetoed her. Second uncle said concocting pills, refining tools, formations and talismans, no matter which one it was, required a lot of effort. As an aura refining cultivator, spending most of her time on these things wasn't worth it, except for cultivators who had no hope of building their foundation. Besides, since she was so talented in formations, she really didn't need to learn pill concocting. It was really difficult to train a concocting master. Even small cultivation clans couldn't afford to provide for one, let alone them. Mo Chinga really wasn't sure whether she had the talent for pill concocting. Second uncle said Yi clan members were all good at formations, but there were very few who were good at pill concocting. Thinking that it was more likely that she didn't have the talent, she gave up on this idea. After returning to her residence, she went to second uncle's room first. Second uncle? Yi Jiang, who was still healing his injuries, opened his eyes and asked, "How is it?" "What do you mean how?" Yi Jiang stared at her and shook his head. "Didn't you go out early in the morning to gather information?" Mo Chinga stuck out her tongue. "Second uncle, you're really a roundworm in my stomach." Yi Jiang glanced at her and said with a humph, "Impudent." She smiled and moved closer to him. Second uncle, Uncle Huang, said the two clans already found out about the deaths, but they're blaming each other. They said it was the other party's doing and they didn't find anything. Yi Jiang nodded. "That's good. Even if they find out it wasn't the other party's doing, it'll be hard for them to trace it back to you. Now that the Immortals' Assembly is approaching, Mount Yunwu is filled with crooks and honest folk. They won't be able to find anything." His words were exactly the same as Uncle Huang's. Sure enough, the older the ginger, the spicier. Recalling yesterday's harvest, she became excited and said, "Second uncle, I checked yesterday. Although they didn't have many talismans, there were 5 high-grade talismans among them. Could be said that I made a profit. There were also a lot of medicinal pills, including a bottle of aura-converging pills. Today, I also used their spirit stones to buy restorative panaceas, so I don't lack anything." That's good news. Yi Jiang originally thought the two of them didn't have many spirit stones and talismans on them, but now it seemed the 5 high-grade talismans made up for the loss. That being the case, you don't need to waste your spirit stones anymore. Second uncle will teach you how to transform the spirit trapping formation. In the next few days you'll have a better chance of success. And? She nodded vigorously. Yi Jiang smiled. He stroked her head and handed her a jade slip. "This is the method to lay the formation. Go and study it. Come back tomorrow and tell me how much you've comprehended." Chapter 34. A month passed in the blink of an eye. During this month, Mo Chinga focused on cultivating and comprehending formations. Occasionally she came out to check on the situation. The matter between An clan and Huang clan was done by the other party. The deeper they investigated, the more they found out about the illicit relationship between the two clans. They all accused the other party of instigating the younger generation to seduce them. Since they couldn't solve the problem, they had to fight privately. As a result, both clans suffered losses and their clans declined. More than 10 years later, the remaining cultivators of the two clans died one after another and were removed from Mount Yunwu. Of course, this was a story for later. Right now, as long as they didn't find out anything about her, Mo Chinga didn't care about them. These two clans were originally dogs biting each other and didn't want to let go of this opportunity to make things difficult for each other. She had a more important thing now. The Immortals' Assembly on Mount Yunwu was about to begin. At this time, the number of cultivators on Mount Yunwu was several times more than usual. One reason was that more people came to participate in the Immortals' Assembly, and the other reason was that most of the participants had companions, friends, or elders. Early in the morning, Mo Chinga got up. At the same time, Yi Jiang also stopped recuperating, packed up his belongings and went with her. This was the tradition of the Immortals' Assembly. Because the Immortals' Assembly was a competition of life and death, the participants would be accompanied by their relatives and friends. If they really died, their belongings would be taken back by their relatives and friends. If they didn't, the belongings would belong to the sect. The uncle and nephew duo flew along the mountain road to the mountain where Yunwu sect was located. They first went to register with the gatekeeper and got their identity tablets before they could enter with second uncle. Seeing that Yi Jiang was in the foundation building realm, the young gatekeeper took a second look at him. It was naturally much easier for foundation building cultivators to join a sect, and it was also very easy for them to bring their nephews and disciples into the sect. Therefore, there were only a few foundation building cultivators accompanying them to the Immortals' Assembly. However, seeing that Yi Jiang didn't have much lifespan left, the disciple looked away. First, the sect didn't want to accept foundation-building cultivators who were about to die and had no hope of advancing. Second, those foundation-building cultivators didn't want to be restricted by the sect when they were about to die. This wasn't strange at all. Today, Yunwu sect was like a Taoist temple in the secular world. The mountain road was full of people. Mo Chinga estimated that there were probably thousands of people. Of the 1,000 or so people, even if half of them wanted to go up on stage, there would still be over 1,000 people. However, the sect only recruited a few dozen people. It was clear how intense the competition was. After entering the Yunwu mountain gate, there was a large square. It occupied a large area and could accommodate 10,000 people. Behind the square was a magnificent hall surrounded by clouds and mist. It gave off the feeling of a celestial sect. At this moment, 10 arenas had already been set up on the square. Each arena was guarded by several foundation-building cultivators. There were also aura-refining cultivators registering. The rule of this arena was that if you won more than 10 people in the arena, you would advance to the next round. In the next round of competition, you would still have to win more people until there were only a few dozen people left. Second uncle had told her that it wasn't easy to fight from the beginning to the end. In the beginning, there would always be people who wanted to obtain the qualification as soon as possible, and the experts hadn't even gone on stage yet. In the end, there would be many people who had lost in other arenas. In order to fight for the last chance, they would even fight with their lives on the line. More than half of the casualties would happen at the last moment. Therefore, she decided to enter the arena at about the middle of the battle. This way she could avoid the front and back of the battle, and it should be easier for her to meet people who were fighting with their lives on the line. When the sun rose, several summoning talismans flew out of the hall and fell directly into the hands of the cultivators guarding the arenas. After these cultivators received the summoning talismans, they announced the start of the competition on their respective arenas. Each arena was a separate competition and everyone could fight once. Therefore, many people would first enter our arena at the beginning of the competition. If they couldn't win, they would pick a weaker arena and fight again. However, this method was rarely successful because talismans, spirit stones, and the like would be used up. Individual cultivators didn't have enough wealth to spend like this. Even if they did, they would inevitably suffer some injuries in the process, so it would be much harder to fight than the first time. Mo Chinga and Mo Chinga casually guarded our arena to watch. Soon they saw someone enter the arena. It was a strong man in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm in his 30s. According to the rules of the Immortals Assembly, only those under the age of 50 could register. Because it was very difficult for cultivators to advance after the age of 50, most of the people present were in their 30s or 40s. There weren't many young people like Mo Chinga who hadn't reached 20 yet. The strong man handed over his identity tablet to the cultivator in charge of registration, then raised his voice and said, "Which fellow Taoist wants to come up and give me some pointers?" His voice was as loud as a bell, so the people below the arena could hear him clearly. Seeing that there was already a 9th layer aura refining cultivator at the beginning of the competition, the cultivators surrounding the arena sighed one after another. The 10th layer was the highest level of the aura refining realm. How could the 6th or 7th layer aura refining cultivators not feel helpless when there was already such a high-level person at the beginning? However, there were naturally some people who didn't want to let this go. Sure enough, someone came to the arena. He first handed over his identity tablet, then greeted the strong man. "Brother, I'm here to ask for your guidance." The two of them exchanged some pleasantries before they each took out their spirit tools and began to fight. Yi Jiang shook his head and said, "Let's go to the other arenas." Mo Chinga didn't have any objections. The fighting methods of the two cultivators in this arena were very ordinary. Her cultivation level was slightly lower, but relying on her handy greenwood sword and greenwood art, it wasn't difficult for her to win. The second arena was actually a battle of talismans between two people. Mo Chinga didn't know where these two people came from, but they were actually throwing talismans at each other as if they were free. They were even crazier than when she killed the cultivator from An clan. Mo Chinga thought about it. She really couldn't think of any other way to deal with such an opponent other than throwing talismans like the other party. Spirit tools couldn't be as fast as talismans, and spells also consumed spiritual aura, so the person with more talismans would definitely win. The last few arenas were very ordinary. Yi Jiang couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw one of the arenas. Mo Chinga was curious. "What's wrong, second uncle?" Yi Jiang watched for a while before he finally shook his head. "This cultivator's spiritual aura is very skillful. Presumably he either has an elder or is someone with a firm will. Emo Chenga looked at the arena. It was a fight between a middle-aged man in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm in his 40s and a young man in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm in his early 20s. The middle-aged cultivator had a fan-shaped spirit tool while the young man only had a defensive talisman on his body. However, the young man's spells were fast and accurate, so the middle-aged cultivator was in a difficult situation. Presumably, second uncle was talking about this young man. Emo Chenga watched for a long time but still couldn't figure anything out, so she said, "This person only practices spells very well." Yi Jiang smiled and shook his head. "This person's spells are very ordinary, but the circulation of his spiritual aura is very fast. Look at the time he attacks, he practically doesn't need to prepare before he casts spells one after another. Ordinary aura refining cultivators need a long time to circulate their spiritual aura before casting spells, and it's precisely because of this that talismans are faster than spells. But look at him, he's not much slower than talismans. This is the limit that aura refining cultivators can reach." Emo Chenga took a closer look. Sure enough, that was the case. This person cast spells as if he was casting talismans. One after another, his opponent couldn't parry them. To be able to practice this skill, it's either because of an elder's guidance or because he deliberately practiced the circulation of his spiritual aura. Moreover, he spent a lot of effort on it. To be able to spend so much effort on these seemingly useless things, and for such a long time, it's obvious that he's a person with a firm will. Emo Chenga felt great admiration. Not only did she admire this person's willpower, but she also admired second uncle's keen eyesight. Just by looking at the speed at which this young man cast spells, he was able to infer this person's temperament. The uncle and nephew duo looked around before they finally chose a place. Yi Jiang said, "This place is fine. You'll go next." Emo Chenga responded with a yes, and focused her attention on the fight in the ring. What was rare was that the two cultivators in the ring both looked like youths in their 20s. Moreover, both of them were in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. One of them was using a flying sword while the other was using a whip. The flying sword was a high-grade spirit tool, and the young man using the sword also seemed to have a very pure spiritual aura. Gradually, the young man using the whip could only parry. Because the whip was only a middle-grade spirit tool, it simply didn't dare to come into contact with the flying sword and could only dodge. Before it could, the young man had no choice but to concede. Upon hearing the foundation-building cultivator at the side of the ring announcing the winner, the young man using the flying sword cupped his hands complacently and looked at the crowd below the ring. Yi Jiang said, "Go." Emo Chenga nodded and leaped onto the ring. She first greeted the foundation-building cultivator at the side, then handed over her identity tablet. After the foundation-building cultivator confirmed that there were no problems, she cupped her hands towards the young man and said, "I'm Yi Xiaotun. Please enlighten me, brother." Chapter 35. Seeing that Emo Chenga didn't even look at him before she saluted the referee, as if she didn't take him seriously at all, the youth in the arena was very displeased. He let out a humph, and directly released his flying sword without returning the greeting. Emo Chenga was already prepared. She took out her greenwood sword and began to fight. Although greenwood sword was a wooden sword, it had been repaired by a high-level cultivator and was also a high-level spirit tool. Moreover, it matched her greenwood art, so it wasn't inferior to the opponent's flying sword. Thus they fought back and forth. Seeing that the youth was focused on controlling his flying sword, Emo Chenga secretly took out a handful of seeds from her Chenkuan bag. To qualify, she had to win 10 matches in a row. Although she could eat restorative panaceas, no one could predict what kind of difficult opponent she would encounter. Therefore, it was best to finish the match quickly to save spiritual aura. Therefore, Emo Chenga didn't intend to win slowly. She only probed the youth's strength and made a decision. She once again controlled her greenwood sword to meet the opponent's flying sword. In the next moment, she raised her left hand and 3 seeds flew towards the opponent. The opponent soon felt something was wrong. In his hurry, he didn't dare to take the seeds head-on and could only dodge. However, Emo Chenga once again shot 3 seeds. This time he only managed to tilt his head while the other 2 seeds hit his body. A ball instantly grew out of the one on his body, and then it exploded his protective barrier. The one below immediately grew into thorns and firmly entangled his legs. The youth turned pale with fright and hurriedly commanded his flying sword to cut off the thorns. He then took out a talisman from his robe and threw it at Emo Chenga to stall her greenwood sword. Emo Chenga didn't block the talisman. Instead, she leaped up and retrieved her greenwood sword. She dodged the talisman and instantly rushed over with her sword. Before the young man had time to move, the greenwood sword shook off his flying sword and pointed at his chest. The youth didn't dare to move because Emo Chenga already had a talisman in her other hand. He believed that as soon as he moved, the talisman would be thrown out. He had no choice but to reluctantly say, "I admit defeat." Emo Chenga smiled and retrieved her greenwood sword. A few years ago, when she wandered around with second uncle, she discovered that cultivators relied too much on spirit tools and talismans in fights of magical powers, but they weren't good at martial arts. Therefore, on the basis of her light body technique, she fused it with secular martial arts. In this way, her reaction speed would be faster than others. That day when he killed the man from the Yin family in the forest, the reason why he was able to gain the upper hand was also because his reaction was faster than that man's. It was relatively easy for her to defeat this young man because second uncle had always asked her to practice the use of spiritual aura. Moreover, her spirit tool was also of high quality, so her chances of winning against someone of the same cultivation level or even 1 or 2 layers higher than her were quite high. After all, it wasn't like that day when she had to save her own life. Today, with second uncle below her, her life wasn't in danger, so she could face the enemy calmly. Of course, if the opponent was a level 10 Chi training cultivator or a level 9 Chi training cultivator, it would be difficult to win. The second person who came up was also a cultivator in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm like her. Emo Chenga didn't have to spend too much effort to win. However, after that, no more 7th layer Chi refining cultivators came up, only 8th and 9th layer Chi refining cultivators. In the beginning, Emo Chenga had an easy time, but after winning 5 or 6 battles she started to feel a bit strenuous. The last few battles were basically won by relying on the greenwood sword, which was superior to ordinary high-grade spirit tools. Usually their spiritual aura was almost exhausted after they finished fighting. Yunwu sect also had a rule that stated the winner could meditate for a while, but not for too long. Therefore they had to rely on spirit stones to recover their spiritual aura. Fortunately, Emo Chenga had prepared enough spirit stones, so she was able to recover her spiritual aura every time. However, after fighting 5 or 6 battles in a row, she still felt tired. This was mental exhaustion. Even though she had abundant spiritual aura, it didn't help her. Nevertheless, her winning streak had attracted the attention of the spectators in the surroundings. There were many 7th layer Chi refining cultivators participating in the Immortals Assembly, but most of them were 9th or 10th layer cultivators. It was very rare for someone to win against 4 cultivators whose cultivation level was higher than theirs in a row. At present, aside from this arena, there wasn't a single arena guarded by a 7th layer Chi refining cultivator. Moreover, the spell she used was indeed different from the others. Seeds sprouted in an instant and only attacked when they were in front of the enemy. It was much more powerful than ordinary wood element spells. Ordinary wood element spells used spiritual aura to create plants, so they certainly consumed more spiritual aura than seeds. Seeds flying in the sky were really difficult to defend against. She used a high-grade talisman and barely managed to defeat an 8th layer Chi refining cultivator. However, the next challenger made Emo Chenga feel very powerless. It was a 10th layer Chi refining cultivator. If 8th and 9th layer Chi refining cultivators had a 50-50 chance of winning, then 10th layer Chi refining cultivators were obviously at a disadvantage. Nevertheless, she instantly made up her mind. That being the case, she'd fight with talismans and spiritual panaceas. After the two of them greeted each other, Emo Chenga immediately took out her greenwood sword and patted a defensive talisman on her body. This cultivator was a middle-aged man. Obviously he was very experienced in fights of magical powers. He calmly took out his spirit tool, which was actually a small flag, and it floated in front of him. All flag-type spirit tools were either defensive or spirit-controlling, so they weren't easy to deal with. Emo Chenga was a bit cautious. She controlled her greenwood sword and threw the talisman and the seeds in her hand at the same time towards the middle-aged cultivator. However, she saw that the middle-aged cultivator wasn't anxious at all. He waved the small flag and unexpectedly released spiritual aura to attract all the attacks. Moreover, the flag wasn't damaged at all under the attacks. Emo Chenga frowned. Apparently this flag was a defensive treasure. This was going to be troublesome. Her opponent's cultivation level was higher than hers, so his attacks would be very strenuous for her. Her plan was to make the first move and gain the upper hand. If she managed to injure her opponent, it would be much easier to deal with him. However, her opponent had this kind of spirit tool. She still threw a lot of seeds, but she didn't use the talismans anymore. If she didn't use them and wasted the talismans, it wouldn't be easy for her to continue fighting. While receiving her attacks, her opponent shot a fireball at her. Fire elemental magic was the most powerful magic among the 5 elements. As long as a cultivator had a fire elemental spiritual root, he or she would most likely cultivate fire elemental magic. Wuxia didn't dare to underestimate him. She immediately used the light body technique to dodge to the side, but she found that it wasn't difficult to dodge the fireball. She was pleasantly surprised. It seemed her opponent was good at defense and not offense, so she still had a chance to win. Fortunately, she only used ordinary thorn grass and cactus. The seeds didn't cost much, so she just threw them as if they didn't cost anything. Wuxia was a bit anxious because her attacks didn't work. If this went on, it would definitely be disadvantageous for her because she had been fighting for too long and was mentally exhausted to a certain extent. Although her opponent wasn't good at attacking, she still found it more and more difficult to dodge. Moreover, as long as her opponent raised the flag, he didn't need to use any defensive methods. It could be said that as long as he completely defended against her attacks, he would be in an invincible position because she would definitely make a mistake before him. No, she must change the situation to have a chance to win. She held a handful of seeds in her hand and threw more than 10 seeds at the same time. The middle-aged cultivator was still pouring spiritual aura into the small flag. He didn't notice that some of the seeds didn't fly at him but fell in other directions. Wuxia patiently dodged the spells and threw the seeds. Finally, she threw all the seeds in the direction she wanted. She stopped, gathered the spiritual aura in her palms and suddenly pressed them down. Around the ring, several thistles and vines suddenly grew and surrounded the middle-aged cultivator. The middle-aged cultivator was shocked because he found these thistles and vines were circling around him. As they circled around, the scene in front of him gradually blurred. Soon, even the thistles and vines disappeared. His surroundings became hazy. He couldn't see anything except himself. He looked around and raised his vigilance. Deep in his heart there was a bit of fear. He originally didn't take this 7th layer aura refining boy seriously, but this move was obviously a formation. This was a field he was completely unfamiliar with. Suddenly, spells were thrown at him. He used the flag to block them one by one, but the attacks were endless. He couldn't relax. Eventually, his spiritual aura was slowly exhausted and the restorative panacea couldn't hold on for much longer. Outside the formation, Wuxia didn't attack. Instead, she threw several spirit stones to control the formation. She rested for a while and waited for her opponent's spiritual aura to run out. Fortunately, her opponent wasn't proficient in formations and hadn't moved from his position. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for her to lay a formation in the middle of a fight. Finally, seeing that her opponent was getting more and more tired, she took out a high-level water talisman and threw it at him. Water came up from the middle-aged cultivator's feet. Wuxia threw another ordinary earth element spell, causing quicksand to appear under the cultivator's feet. The things under his feet weren't easy to detect. Moreover, it was already very strenuous for this cultivator to use the small flag. When the quicksand appeared, the water had already trapped him. He wanted to use the flag to break this spell, but he discovered that he didn't have enough spiritual aura. Wuxia took out her greenwood sword and stabbed it towards that cultivator. Chapter 36. When the greenwood sword appeared in front of him, the middle-aged cultivator had no choice but to move the small flag to block the tip of the sword. However, the quicksand and water under his feet surged up even faster. Wuxia didn't stop and threw another talisman at him. With a loud sound, the cultivator fell down in the ring. At this time, the foundation-building cultivator who was the referee walked forward and examined the cultivator. He then stood up and nodded. Yi Xiaotian wins. Wuxia relaxed. Seeing second uncle's gratified smile, she hastily sat down to recover her spiritual aura. In order to consume her opponent's spiritual aura, she also took a restorative panacea. It wasn't easy for her to hold on, so she was really exhausted. Without the support of her spiritual aura, the formation lost its effectiveness. The thistles and thorns withered one after another. When the middle-aged cultivator finally saw the outside of the formation, he stood up with a pale face and jumped off the ring. The defense of his flag was really amazing. Wuxia used all her strength but still didn't cause him any serious injuries. However, losing to a 7th layer aura refining cultivator was probably a big blow to his confidence. Moreover, if he lost this round he could only fight in another ring. The injuries he suffered and the medicine he took this time would affect his performance in the next round, so it would be much more difficult for him to win. Mo Chinga also didn't feel good. This was the 8th round. She still had to defeat 2 people to qualify for the next round. However, she was really too tired now. If another opponent like the middle-aged cultivator came, it would be very difficult for her to hold on. However, with her cultivation level, it would be very difficult for her to defeat 10 people if she had to fight against a bunch of 9th and 10th layer opponents who were just as eager to win. Besides, she was almost exhausted now. She also used talismans, medicinal pills and spirit stones, so she almost couldn't fight in the next ring. Therefore she could only fight with all her strength. In any case, second uncle was here. As long as she didn't court death, her life wouldn't be in danger. Unfortunately, if she was from a cultivation clan, she would send a disciple of her clan to fight in the ring. That way there would be a total of 10 people, unlike now where she could only fight recklessly. However, when she recovered her spiritual aura, she found that no one had entered the ring yet. The referee shouted again, "Those who want to fight, please come up quickly. If no one comes up within a quarter of an hour, the ring master will directly win." After a while someone finally came up. He was a 7th layer chi refinement cultivator. Mo Chinga was baffled. Generally speaking, the opponents in the competition would become stronger and stronger. After watching the previous fights of magical powers, people who didn't have some skill wouldn't dare to step onto the stage. Only those who had a way to deal with their opponents would step onto the stage. Could it be that this 7th layer aura refining cultivator, who was also like her, had something special about him? Raising his spirit, he began to fight. However, this cultivator was very ordinary. He used the verdant wood art and after a short while, the cultivator admitted defeat. Mo Chinga was greatly puzzled. Why did it seem like this cultivator was trying to make up the numbers for her? What she didn't know was that the battle with the 10th layer aura refining cultivator had already made everyone afraid to go on stage again. Defeating a 10th layer chi refining 7th layer cultivator was definitely more revered than defeating a 10th layer cultivator. This was because it wasn't rare for a 10th layer cultivator to defeat a cultivator of the same level, but defeating a 7th layer cultivator was rare, and all of them were difficult to deal with. Moreover, everyone could see that the other party was proficient in formations. Most people were helpless against him. Needless to say, those who weren't sure they could defeat her were afraid of exhausting their spiritual aura like the other cultivator, which would affect the following fights. In any case, it hadn't been long since the competition started, so it didn't matter if she was a bit late. Therefore, almost everyone tacitly agreed to let her win this round so they could start the next one as soon as possible. After watching so many fights, the cultivator who stepped onto the stage realized he had almost no hope of winning, so he came up to experience her strength. He wanted to use this as a goal and come back next time. This time it took a long time for one person to step onto the stage. His cultivation level was even worse, only in the 6th layer. Soon he lost to her and left the stage. The referee, a foundation-building cultivator, called her to the side and handed her the identity tablet. He had already marked it and told her to come back after the fight was over. Then he announced the next round. Mo Chinga was ecstatic. She walked down the stage unsteadily and almost fell. Fortunately, Yi Jiang stepped forward and supported her. "Second uncle, I succeeded." Yi Jiang smiled and helped her out of the crowd. He said, "Rest for a while. It's good that you've won." Mo Chinga nodded, then sat cross-legged to adjust her breath until her spiritual aura recovered. After she stopped to adjust her breath, she opened her eyes and looked at second uncle with joy. "Second uncle, I really succeeded, right?" Yi Jiang nodded with a smile. "You really succeeded. If you concentrate on fighting, you'll naturally succeed." This wasn't to comfort her. She just didn't have much experience in life and death fights, but she wasn't weak in this kind of competition. Mo Chinga then looked worried. This is only the first round of the competition, but it's already so difficult. What about the next round? Thinking up to this point, Yi Jiang also sighed. "If you can't succeed, then forget it. We won't force you." Indeed, she was already lucky to win. In the next round, none of the opponents would be easy to deal with. Even if she won against one, it would be difficult for her to win against two. The uncle and nephew duo comforted each other, then cheered up and went to watch the competition. While Mo Chinga was resting, the winners of each ring appeared one after another. Most of them were 9th and 10th layer cultivators. There was only one 8th layer cultivator and another 7th layer cultivator. According to others' discussions, the other 7th layer cultivator was a young man in his 20s who seemed to be a disciple of a cultivation clan. He had a magic weapon in his hand and no one could match him, so he smoothly won against 10 people. It was already afternoon, and the fights in the rings were getting more and more intense. Most of the people had already entered the rings and now some of them were fighting with their lives on the line. Injuries occurred frequently, and the injuries were getting more and more serious. The more Wuxia watched, the more she couldn't bear to watch. This was the first time she participated in the Immortals' Assembly. Although she was mentally prepared, she still didn't expect it to be this tragic. She couldn't help but feel sad. The path to immortality was uncertain, and individual cultivators were even more difficult. For a little bit of hope, they were willing to risk their lives. This path was really sad. Finally, at sunset, everyone finished their competition, and the referees announced the end of the competition. In this Immortals' Assembly, 2 people died from serious injuries and countless people were injured. Wuxia heaved a sigh of relief and went forward with the other victors. The foundation-building cultivators from each of the 10 rings gathered together. They swept their gazes over the victors one by one, frowning and discussing something. This made them restless. They didn't know what was dissatisfied with them. Wuxia couldn't help but sweep her gaze over them, but she didn't find anything wrong. There were only about 20 victors and half of them were injured. Among them there were only 4 women and half of them were young men. That was probably because those who could reach this level of cultivation in their 20s were usually the descendants of cultivation clans, so their chances of winning were naturally high. Wuxia didn't know what these foundation-building cultivators were discussing, but soon, the leader of the group sent a summoning talisman into the main hall. After a while, the summoning talisman flew back. The leader took it and several people gathered together to listen. After a short discussion, they stood up and faced the others. Obviously, they were going to announce the next round. Wuxia couldn't help but feel a bit nervous, worried that something might happen. The leader was a foundation-building cultivator with half white hair and a beard. He swept his solemn gaze over them and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, only 24 people won in the first round of the Immortals' Assembly. Because of this, the sect head ordered that there's no need to continue the competition and that all 24 people will be accepted into the sect. You can go back and deal with your affairs first. Tomorrow at the hour of the 11th hour, report to the sect." Everyone was in an uproar. They were both surprised and happy. Wuxia was even more so. She was originally worried she wouldn't be able to pass the second round, but she never expected there would be such a change this time. She was immediately overjoyed. She could directly enter Yunwu's sect. Chapter 37. Second uncle won't be by your side when you go up the mountain this time, so you have to be careful. That spirit-concealing jade pendant must never leave your body, and you mustn't reveal your female appearance in front of others unless you form your gold core one day and have the power to protect yourself. If you have any difficulties with your cultivation, come down the mountain and ask second uncle. Don't fight with your fellow disciples, understand? Wuxia nodded with a reluctant expression. Second uncle, you have to be careful when you're alone at the foot of the mountain. If anything happens, send me a message and I'll come down the mountain immediately. Yijiang nodded and comforted her. Rest assured. This market square belongs to Yunwu's sect, so there won't be any danger here. Besides, second uncle is a foundation-building cultivator after all, so no one will provoke me. You also shouldn't go down the mountain too often. It's not good if people see you. Once a month is enough. But, Wuxia hesitated. If I'm not here, what about second uncle's medicinal pills? Yijiang smiled. Since you're already a Yunwu sect disciple, Yunwu sect's shops can sell things for you. When the time comes, you can go to second uncle's shop to get the formations and sell them for spirit stones. This was actually a good thing. As it turned out, they were only individual cultivators. Yunwu sect's shops sold their things at a very low price. Moreover, the shopkeeper didn't know what was good and refused to pay a high price for their formations. It wouldn't be a problem if they sold things for him. Wuxia was delighted. Second uncle, wait for me to build my foundation. At that time I can have my own immortal's cave and we can be together. Yijiang nodded with a smile. Second uncle will wait for you. It's almost the hour of the 7th now. You should go quickly. And I'm leaving. I'll come back to see you after a while. After packing her luggage, Wuxia used the light body technique and leaped towards the gate of Yunwu's sect. Yijiang sighed faintly as he stared at her back. When she arrived at the gate, Wuxia saw disciples guarding the gate. She walked forward with a smile, saluted them and asked, "Senior Marshal Brothers, I came to report today. May I know where I'm going?" Seeing her being so polite, the 2 disciples also looked amiable. They pointed inside and replied, "Junior Marshal Brother, just wait there. Senior Marshal Brother will come to greet you later. Mo Chinga looked in that direction. Sure enough, there were already several people there. She saluted them again and said, "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brothers." She then followed the directions and entered the monastery, obediently waiting in an empty spot. Second uncle told her not to offend any aura refining cultivators, not even those who fetched water and cooked. Although they had no ability, they were the most troublesome ones. Therefore, even if they were only 2 disciples guarding the gate, she still called them. Just as she was bored to death, someone walked up to her and said, "Junior Marshal Brother, how do you do?" Mo Chinga turned her head and saw that this person was the only qualified 8th layer aura refining cultivator. This person was only in his 20s. He had an upright face and his whole body was neat and tidy. He left a good impression on others. Marshal N and TT, Mo to Mo Marshal Uncle. That person smiled gently and elegantly. "Junior Marshal Brother, you're already in the 7th layer at such a young age and your strength is outstanding. I'm afraid you'll surpass me soon. I'm Su Jingji. May I know your name?" Yi Xiaotian. Since this person was so polite, she naturally returned the favor. "What are you talking about, Senior Marshal Brother? I just ate a lot of medicinal pills to reach my current cultivation level. I was also lucky enough to win against several people, so I was selected. In terms of strength, Senior Marshal Brother is definitely stronger than me." Su Jingji smiled and waved his hand. He then said to her, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, we entered the sect together, so we'll probably be assigned to the same place to cultivate. Please take good care of us in the future." "Is that so?" Mo Chinga didn't know how Yunwu sect arranged its new disciples, but she still replied, "That's true. We should take care of each other." The two of them chatted for a while. Soon, other people arrived one after another. Mo Chinga discovered that the 10th layer aura refining middle-aged cultivator who lost to her the other day was also among them. Apparently he won in another ring. However, his face was pale and he was obviously injured. In addition, the youth she saw yesterday who cast spells as fast as talismans was also among them. When the hour of the dog approached and the sun was setting in the west, 2 10th layer aura refining cultivators came from the direction of the main hall. They saluted everyone and said, "Junior Marshal Brothers and Sisters, please follow us to see the sect head." Everyone answered respectfully and followed the 2 people to the main hall. Upon entering the main hall, Mo Chinga finally realized that this hall was tall and majestic. The interior of the hall was richly decorated and filled with spiritual aura. At the very top, there was a high chair on which a middle-aged man with a long beard was sitting and drinking tea. Mo Chinga sensed that this person's spiritual aura was surging. He was undoubtedly the sect head's core formation grandmaster, Fang Dingyue. Sure enough, the 2 cultivators who led the 2 of them and stood on both sides of the hall and said, "Junior Marshal Brothers, quickly greet the sect head." Everyone hastily saluted. "Disciples greet the sect head." Fang Dingyue put down the tea set, stood up and raised his hand. "You may rise." He swept his gaze over everyone and waited until everyone was standing respectfully before he said, "Since you've joined my Yunwu sect, you must abide by Yunwu sect's rules. The sect will also do its best to provide convenience for your cultivation. Since you stood out among thousands of people, it means you're all outstanding aura refining cultivators. I hope you'll cultivate diligently, advance to the foundation building realm and carry forward my Yunwu sect. Alright, it's getting late. You should go to the steward's hall to register your names and collect your items. Tomorrow you'll cultivate together with my Yunwu sect's disciples." After a simple lecture, the 2 aura refining cultivators led everyone out of the main hall, around several places and into a courtyard. This courtyard was very simple. It didn't have the grandeur of the main hall at all. It looked just like an ordinary secular courtyard. There was a table in the courtyard's main hall, and a foundation building cultivator was sitting behind it, meditating. The 2 cultivators who led them into the hall respectfully said, "Marshal Uncle Yu, I've brought new disciples to register." The cultivator didn't answer and continued to cultivate. The 2 aura refining cultivators weren't in a hurry and just waited. After a long time, the foundation building cultivator finally opened his eyes. He faintly swept his gaze over them and said, "Hand over your identity tablets one by one to collect your items." The 2 of them answered, "Yes." He then turned to them and said, "Junior Marshal Brothers and Sisters, come in one by one. After you've collected your items, wait in the courtyard for a while. We'll take you to your residences in a moment." Everyone hastily nodded and said yes. Soon after, they went in one by one, none of them daring to compete. Soon it was Mo Chinga's turn to go in. The foundation building cultivator checked her identity tablet and wrote her name on another jade slip. He then took out another jade slip and told her to leave her divine sense imprint on both the jade slip and the jade slip. After leaving the jade slip, he handed the jade slip to her. Soon after, he picked up a Chenkuan bag out of nowhere and tossed it to her. Mo Chinga hastily caught it and saluted him before leaving. Soon, everyone finished registering and followed the two aura refining cultivators. This time they walked for an unknown amount of time until they arrived at the back of the mountain. They took a detour and finally stopped at a mountain residence. This was also a courtyard, but it was different from the courtyard in the steward's hall. It was a bamboo house surrounded by a fence. Someone immediately came out. It was a middle-aged woman in the foundation building realm. The two aura refining disciples hastily stepped forward and saluted her. "Greetings, Martial Uncle Lin. We're here to escort several new junior martial sisters. We'll have to trouble Martial Uncle to make arrangements for them." The woman frowned and said coldly, "Why didn't you escort the female disciples here alone? It's not appropriate for so many men to come to my female courtyard." The two of them repeatedly apologized. Yes. Disciples were reckless. "Martial Uncle, please punish us." The woman snorted. "Forget it. Female disciples, follow me." The only 4 female disciples stepped forward and saluted her in unison. "Greetings, Martial Uncle. That'll do. You can leave now." The woman led the female disciples into the courtyard, but she didn't pay any attention to the others. The two aura refining disciples smiled bitterly at each other. They then led everyone to another bamboo house. "This is your residence. Senior Martial Brother Zhou is in charge of this place. However, he's out because he has something to do, so we'll take care of it first. Each of you will have a room, so 5 people will share a big house. I'll call your names so you can pick your own room." Soon, Mo Chenga was also assigned a room. She saluted, then went to the big house. Su Jingji was unexpectedly assigned to the same big house as her. 4 cultivators, tidying up a room was nothing more than a few minor spells. Therefore, after a while, the cultivators living in the same big house met in the small hall and got to know each other. In Mo Chenga's room, aside from Su Jingji, there were 3 other people. 2 of them were in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, and 1 was in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm. The 9th layer aura refining cultivator was called Qin Shi. He was the youth she saw yesterday who cast spells that were comparable to talismans. He seemed to be in his early 20s. He had a handsome face, but he didn't seem to like talking much. Of the 2 10th layer aura refining cultivators, one was called Lui Dao. He was a very forthright and strong man. The other was called Jiang Shanghong. He seemed to be less than 30 years old. His facial features were regular, but he looked gloomy and cold. He seemed to be a cultivator who practiced water spells. In this house, Mo Chenga was the youngest. Both her cultivation level and age were the lowest, so she straightforwardly took them as her junior and called them senior martial brothers. The oldest was naturally Lui Dao. He was already 32 years old, but he treated people warmly and had the demeanor of a boss, so he became her senior martial brother. Next was Jiang Shanghong, who was 28 years old. Su Jingji and Qin Shi looked about the same age, but Qin Shi said he was 24 years old while Su Jingji said he was 23 years old. Therefore, Qin Shi was the oldest. Lui Dao and Su Jingji were both the same age and cultivation level. Lui Dao and Su Jingji repeatedly exclaimed that it was a coincidence and said they wanted to drink a cup of wine. Unfortunately, everyone had just arrived at the sect and it was getting dark. There was nowhere to find wine, so they could only give up. Since they had just arrived, everyone needed to tidy up their things. Therefore, they only gathered for a short while before returning to their respective rooms to cultivate and adapt to the environment. Mo Chenga finally heaved a sigh of relief after she returned to her small room and laid a defensive formation. She then sat on the bed, feeling powerless all over. Although she had the spirit-concealing jade pendant, she was still very worried that her disguise would be seen through. Fortunately, the jade pendant was just as Yi Jingwen said. Even nascent soul cultivators couldn't see through her constitution, so it was much safer for her to disguise as a man. Originally, she thought it would be a bit more convenient to enter the sect as a woman, but second uncle said the women in the sect might have already been assigned dual cultivation candidates, so it would be better for her to continue to disguise as a man. In any case, she didn't need to live with other people, so there shouldn't be any harm in being a bit more careful. Now, although she had her own room in the sect, she would still be living with many men, so she had to be extremely careful in the future. Chapter 38. The room wasn't big. In the corner of the room, There was a low bed covered with a straw mat and a praying mat. There was also a wooden table and a chair. Apart from that, there was nothing else. However, this was a cultivation group after all. Both the straw mat and the wooden table had a faint spiritual aura. Obviously, they weren't secular things. Once she settled down, Mo Chenga took out all kinds of things from her Chinkuan bag. For example, bedding. Although she didn't need to rest much now, having a quilt made her feel warmer. After everything was packed, she checked the things she brought back. This Chinkuan bag was the most common kind in the cultivation world, far inferior to Mo Chenga's. After all, her Chinkuan bag was Yi clan's collection and wasn't a common item. There weren't many things inside. There was a jade tablet, a cultivation technique manual, 2 bottles of medicinal pills, 20 spirit stones, and a jade slip called Yunwu Sex Handbook which recorded the sex rules and precautions. That jade tablet was an identity tablet. She saw Yi Jingwen use it many years ago. Cultivation groups often used it to prove their disciples' identities. The jade tablet was engraved with the name, age, cultivation level, and so on. At the same time, the sect kept a copy of it for verification if a missing disciple returned. Yunwu Sek's Aura Refining Realm Cultivation Technique Manual was distributed according to the 5 elements. For example, Mo Chenga was registered as cultivating a wood element cultivation technique during the Immortals Assembly, so this cultivation technique was of the wood element. However, this cultivation technique was called the Art of Longevity. It was the most common basic cultivation technique in the cultivation world. It was just a bit more complete than the one circulating in the outside world and also had some annotations from predecessors. There were also 20 spirit stones and 2 bottles of medicinal pills, which were the rewards of the Immortals Assembly. From now on, they would be distributed like ordinary disciples every month. Mo Chenga was very happy with these 2 bottles of medicinal pills. With her spiritual roots, a good cultivation technique, spirit gathering pearl, and spirit gathering formation, she could only guarantee that she wouldn't fall behind ordinary cultivators with 3 spiritual roots. If she wanted to stand out among them, medicinal pills were indispensable. Today she didn't cultivate. Instead she had a good sleep. When she woke up early in the morning she was full of energy. When she left the room the small hall was quiet. There were cultivators' breaths in the other rooms so presumably they were all cultivating. She locked the door and went out to freshen up. It was written in the booklet that this bamboo house had a small stream flowing behind it. The sect drew the water from the stream to form a pool for the disciples to wash. Turning to the back of the house, there was indeed a pool. There was no one around at the moment, so she took a handkerchief to wash up. Of course he would forget about combing his hair. He could go back to his room and do it slowly. After washing up, Zhang Xian was just about to return to his room when he bumped into 2 people who were chatting with each other. Mo Chenga immediately greeted them. "Good morning, senior martial brothers." When the 2 men saw her, they greeted her and chatted while looking for a place to wash their faces. In the next moment, Mo Chenga had the urge to vomit. Because one of them unceremoniously took off his clothes and jumped into the water. Looking at his fat body and thinking about how disgusting it was for him to use this water to wash his face and mouth, he made up his mind that next time, he would definitely go upstream to collect water. When they returned to the big house, Su Jingji was chatting with Qin Shi. Qin Shi's expression was very stiff. Obviously, he wasn't interested in the topic of their conversation. Upon seeing her, Su Jingji immediately called out happily, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, you're so early." Good morning, Senior Martial Brothers." Mo Chenga walked towards them and asked with a smile, "What are you 2 talking about?" Su Jingji said, "We were just talking about going to eat and taking a stroll around the school to understand a bit more." "Oh, I see." Although Su Jingji was overflowing with interest, Qin Shi, who was beside him, obviously wasn't interested. He just didn't refuse to give Su Jingji face. After all, cultivators didn't like to be involved in worldly affairs. Although they couldn't abstain from eating, they generally preferred to eat fasting pills. Mo Chenga thought for a moment then said with a smile, "I'll go with you. I'm really a bit hungry." Su Jingji was very happy. At that moment, the door of another room opened. Louis Dao came out and looked at them. "Junior Martial Brothers, what are you talking about?" "Oh, Senior Martial Brother Lu, we're talking about going to the dining hall to eat something and take a stroll." Louis Dao pondered for a moment then said, "You don't mind if I go with you, right?" Su Jingji waved his hand repeatedly. "Of course not. Senior Martial Brother Lu can't wait to go." Louis Dao laughed. "Since the 4 of us are going, we might as well call Junior Martial Brother Jiang." Su Jingji naturally didn't have any objections. Mo Chenga also didn't care. It was naturally good for her to have a good relationship with the senior martial brothers who lived with her. She still had a wooden expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking. Louis Dao knocked on Jiang Shanghang's door. Junior martial brother Jiang. A moment later the door opened. Jiang Shanghang pulled the bolt and looked at Louis Dao standing at the door. His tone was indifferent, but it still carried a hint of coldness. Senior martial brother Lu, what's the matter? Louis Dao said with a smile. Junior martial brother Jiang, we've decided to go to the dining hall to eat something and then take a stroll. Do you want to go together? Jiang Shanghang frowned. I'm not going. Louis Dao was stunned. He didn't expect this person to be so cold, as if he didn't want to get close to them. He didn't insist and said with a smile, Junior martial brother Jiang, please help yourself. We'll be leaving first. Jiang Shanghang uttered an N, then closed the door in Louis Dao's face. Louis Dao didn't mind. He turned around and called out to the others, let's go. Mo Chenga and Su Jingji glanced at each other, then shook their heads and followed Louis Dao out. After walking for a short distance, Su Jingji secretly said to her, this senior martial brother Jiang is also from a cultivation clan of Yunwu sect. I heard he was abandoned by his clan and gave the opportunity to enter the sect to his cousin. He wasn't willing to accept this, so he was willing to risk his life to participate in the Immortals' assembly. Oh. Mo Chenga finally understood. Presumably, this person's heart was filled with ambition, so he simply didn't want to spend his time on anything other than cultivation. Junior martial brother Jiang's cultivation level is already in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm before he's 30 years old. It's already very rare, but their clan actually gave up on such a disciple? Louis Dao, who had heard their conversation, also came over. Su Jingji was also a member of a cultivation clan, so he knew a lot about this situation. He said, Senior martial brother Lu doesn't know, but their Jiang clan is also one of the best cultivation clans in Yunwu sect. They have 2 core formation cultivators and dozens of foundation building cultivators. They don't care about disciples with 3 spiritual roots or below. This senior martial brother Jiang originally had an elder who, because of a power struggle within the clan, offended the current clan head. That elder has long passed away, so senior martial brother Jiang has to take his anger out on everyone. Aside from Su Jingji, everyone present was an individual cultivator. They couldn't imagine the power struggle within a cultivation clan, so they could only shake their heads. Louis Dao sighed and said, although this junior martial brother Jiang's spiritual roots aren't too good, he's very hardworking in his cultivation. If he had the clan's support, presumably he would have been able to build his foundation. What a pity. Su Jingji also shook his head. According to their Jiang clan's power, they can recommend several disciples to enter the sect every year. In fact, if it was someone else, they wouldn't need to cultivate to the 10th layer to directly enter the sect. They basically wouldn't need to participate in the Immortals' assembly. Unlike our Su clan, which is only a small cultivation clan with very few quotas, we have no choice but to participate in the Immortals' assembly. Several people sighed inwardly. Being an individual cultivator wasn't easy, and cultivation clans weren't always smooth sailing either. Both had their own difficulties. In conclusion, there was only one reason: the path to immortality was difficult. Chapter 39. Following the map in the brochure, they arrived at the dining hall. Someone immediately came to greet them. Senior martial brothers, are you here to eat? Please take a seat. If you want food delivered in the future, just let me know. Mo Chenga saw that this person was quite old and only had a cultivation level in the 1st layer of the aura refining realm. Presumably, he was a descendant of a cultivation clan with poor spiritual roots and could only do odd jobs here to make a living. Among them, Su Jingji was the most familiar, so he said, let's eat what we're supposed to eat. The man grunted in acknowledgement and retreated. Not long after, a mortal woman brought food over. Clearly it had been prepared in advance. Mo Chenga glanced at the dishes. Stir-fried mustard greens, pickled cucumbers, steamed spare ribs, stir-fried rabbit meat, and a bowl of fish soup. All of them had a faint spiritual aura. Apparently the food in Yunwu sect wasn't bad. Mo Chenga and Su Jingji picked up the bowls and chopsticks, but seeing that the other 2 people didn't move, Su Jingji said, Senior martial brothers, you don't have to worry. In fact, eating food with spiritual aura isn't a problem. After a while, you just need to treat it as a medicinal pill to dissolve it. It won't affect your cultivation. Louis Dao hesitated. Really? Mo Chenga smiled. Yes. Otherwise, why would the group set up a dining hall? Wouldn't it be better to just give the disciples fasting pills? Louis Dao asked again, isn't it because fasting pills are troublesome to concoct? Mo Chenga and Su Jingji were both dumbfounded. For a moment they didn't know what to say. Qin Shi, who had been silent the whole time, finally said, the group encourages people to eat fasting pills. That way they won't have to worry about their appetites and it's helpful for cultivation. However, eating food with spiritual aura isn't a problem. If it's from spiritual beasts, it can also increase your spiritual aura, so there's no harm in eating it. Mo Chenga and Su Jingji nodded repeatedly. I see. Louis Dao picked up his chopsticks and the four of them started eating. Most of the time, it was Mo Chenga and Su Jingji eating. The two of them only tasted a few mouthfuls. It was clear that the two of them had firm Dao hearts and didn't care about the desire for good food. After randomly eating some food, Mo Chenga and Su Jingji ordered the servants to deliver food every day and didn't have to spend time coming here anymore. Originally, all the disciples in the sect were like this. No one was willing to spend time on the road every day. Every day they would just ask someone to deliver food. After leaving the dining hall, the four of them strolled around Mount Yunwu with Su Jingji leading the way. After familiarizing themselves with the terrain, they went back together. By now, Mo Chenga had more or less memorized the terrain of this mountain. Mount Yunwu had two peaks, the north and the south. Newcomers like them were all assigned to the south peak. The south peak was shorter and the spirit chi there was also less. The mountain gate was directly connected to the market square, so it was very convenient for low-level disciples to stay here. The north peak, on the other hand, was a lot taller, and the spiritual aura there was also several times better. Apparently, only those who had built their foundation could move to the north peak. For aura-refining disciples like them, they couldn't go to the north peak without a task. On the southern peak, there was the true treasure hall, the deacon's hall, and the Tao propagation palace. The real treasure hall was where the sect leader handled matters. However, the sect leader was usually on the north peak, and the disciples on the south peak were all managed by the deacon's hall. The deacon's hall managed all the affairs of the aura-refining disciples, such as assigning tasks, distributing spirit stones and medicinal pills, arranging accommodation, handling disputes, and so on. The Tao propagation palace, on the other hand, was a place for preaching Tao. Every 10 days a foundation building cultivator would preach there, and occasionally core formation cultivators would come. This was the most popular event for aura-refining disciples. As for the errands, they were usually done by the odd-job disciples. So-called part-time disciples were different from formal disciples like them. Every 10 years, when the mountain gate was open to recruit disciples based on their spiritual roots, some people with poor spiritual roots who failed to be selected would volunteer to become part-time disciples. Their job was to handle some chores such as guarding the gate, running errands, cleaning, and so on. The ones who served them in the dining hall were the part-time disciples. Like them, part-time disciples were also given spirit stones according to the tasks they did. However, they didn't get medicinal pills. If a foundation building elder fancied a part-time disciple, he or she could be promoted to a formal disciple. So many people were willing to become part-time disciples. Of course, it didn't mean that formal disciples didn't have to do anything. For example, guarding the mountain gate required a formal disciple to lead them. Taking care of spiritual plants, concocting pills, and refining tools were all done by formal disciples and a few part-time disciples. However, compared to part-time disciples, formal disciples only needed to do 1 or 2 tasks every year, so they had a lot of time to cultivate. When they returned to their residence, they found an unfamiliar cultivator watering 2 spiritual plants next to the first room. When they were sent here yesterday, the 2 aura-refining disciples told them that the first room was where the manager lived. The manager of their residence was Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, but he wasn't here for the time being. When they saw this person, everyone's expression changed. This person's cultivation level was actually slightly higher than a 10th layer aura refining cultivator, but he hadn't reached the foundation building realm yet, so he seemed to be in the 11th layer. According to the classification of aura refining realms, the 1st to the 4th layer was the early stage of the aura refining realm, the 5th to the 7th layer was the middle stage, the 8th to the 10th layer was the late stage, and the 10th layer was the peak stage of the aura refining realm. However, there was one situation where a cultivator's cultivation level was higher than the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, but he wasn't in the foundation building realm. That was when a cultivator ate a foundation building pill but didn't succeed in building his foundation, but completely absorbed the medicinal power of the foundation building pill, thus advancing to the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. Normally, if one failed in building their foundation, their spiritual aura wouldn't increase. Once this happened, the cultivator would only need 2 foundation building pills at most to successfully build their foundation. If an 11th layer aura refining cultivator took a foundation building pill, they might be able to advance to the 12th layer, but if a 12th layer aura refining cultivator took a foundation building pill, they would definitely advance to the foundation building realm. As for ordinary disciples, the success rate of taking a foundation building pill was no more than 10 to 20%. Therefore, whenever a disciple in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm appeared, the next foundation building pill would definitely fall into their hands. In other words, they were almost all foundation building cultivators. Apparently, this person was their supervisor, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou. It was no wonder that the supervisor of the female courtyard was a foundation building martial uncle, but they were actually a senior martial brother. It turned out that this senior martial brother wasn't an ordinary disciple. While they were still in shock, Senior Martial Brother Zhou had already finished watering the spiritual plants. He turned around and swept a glance at them. While putting away the watering tools, he said, "You're the new disciples?" They regained their senses and hastily saluted him. "Greetings, Senior Martial Brother Zhou." Senior Martial Brother Zhou uttered an N, then went back to trimming the leaves. He said, "Since you're living here, you have to abide by my rules. I don't care whether you cultivate or play around, but you're not allowed to disturb other people, you're not allowed to go to places you're not allowed to go, and you're not allowed to fight. If you need to leave the mountain, you need to inform me. If you have a dispute with someone else, you also need to report to me. Of course, if you encounter any problems in your cultivation, you can also come to me. Understood?" They all answered in unison, "Yes." Senior Martial Brother Zhou waved his hand. "That's enough. You can go now." They saluted him again before returning to their small living room. Once they closed the door, Su Jingji immediately said enviously, "So this is the 11th layer of the aura refining realm. This Senior Martial Brother Zhou's luck is really good. How could Imo Chenga not think so? With her spiritual roots, the possibility of her building her foundation was really very small." Although the 11th layer of the aura refining realm wasn't the foundation building realm, it was tantamount to having 1 foot in the door of the foundation building realm. Louis Dao said, "Among us who entered the sect, which one of us didn't come for the foundation building pills? I just don't know if we'll be as lucky as Senior Martial Brother Zhou. If we can enter the 11th layer of the aura refining realm, then we'll have hope in building our foundation." Qin Shi said, "I heard there's still 3 years until the sect's internal competition. Work hard." The 3 of them nodded repeatedly. The internal competition would award foundation building pills according to the ranking, so they naturally wouldn't let this opportunity slip by. However, Mo Chenga was very worried. Louis Dao was in the 10th layer, so in the next 3 years he only needed to practice fighting. Qin Shi was in the 9th layer, so he had a high chance of entering the 10th layer. He was also good at fights of magical powers. As for Su Jingji, his cultivation level was a bit higher than hers, and he also had the backing of his clan. Only she, who was in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, could enter the sect through luck. Being able to reach the 9th layer of the aura refining realm within 3 years was already very ideal. Wanting to win a foundation building pill was too difficult. Chapter 40. Several days later, a part-time disciple came to deliver their uniforms. Senior Martial Brother Zhou told them that a foundation-building martial uncle would give a sermon in the Dao Preaching Palace today. The uniforms of Mount Yunwu disciples were cyan with clouds and the words, Yunwu Sect, embroidered on the cuffs. The uniforms of aura refining disciples like them couldn't be considered good-looking. Mo Chenga recalled the clothes Yi Jingwen wore in her memory. They were really elegant and much better than Yunwu Sect's clothes. She then laughed at herself. Sure enough, a woman's nature was hard to change. She tightened her chest, wrapped her waist a few more times and put on a robe. She looked at her flat figure in the mirror with satisfaction. She didn't look like a woman at all. For immortal cultivators, it was safer to use magic or spiritual weapons like this. However, it was getting harder and harder for her to pretend. After she turned 15, the difference between her and a man became bigger and bigger. Not only did she have to tie her chest and waist, but she also had to pretend to be a man. Fortunately, her voice wasn't sharp, so it wasn't easy to be suspicious. After confirming there were no problems, she opened the door and saw that the other 3 people were ready. As for Jiang Shanghong, he had long left on his own. That person was incompatible with them, but it didn't matter. As cultivators, they didn't care about establishing friendships and the like. The reason why the four of them always moved together was because Lui Dao and Su Jingji were very cordial. Fortunately, apart from them, everyone was focused on cultivating. Otherwise, she also wanted to learn from Jiang Shanghang and ignore everything. When they arrived at the Dao preaching palace, everyone found a place to sit. Before long, a middle-aged Taoist with a foundation building cultivation walked up and sat on the praying mat at the very front, facing everyone. Everyone hurriedly stood up and bowed. "Greetings, martial uncle." The Taoist nodded. "Disciples, please sit." There were at least several hundred people in the Tao preaching palace. At this moment, everyone was sitting cross-legged on the praying mats in silence. The Taoist examined them and said, "My Taoist name is Qingyu. This month I'll preach to the disciples. A few days ago, a group of new disciples entered the sect, so today I'll talk about the meaning of Tao. Dear disciples, what is the Tao to you? Why do you cultivate?" Once Taoist Qingyu finished speaking, a disciple in the front row answered, "Martial uncle, Tao is the law of heaven and earth. Cultivating is for longevity." Taoist Qingyu nodded, then asked, "Does any of the disciples have any objections?" Another person answered, reporting to Uncle Master, "This disciple thinks that Tao is the origin, and cultivation is for longevity." Taoist Qingyu nodded with a smile. "You're right. Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things, and that is the origin. The sun and moon lay dormant, the 4 seasons alternated, and everything in the netherworld followed the cause. These were the laws of heaven and earth. We cultivate for the sake of longevity, and also the process of pursuing the Tao. Logically speaking, life and death, withering and flourishing, were originally the Tao of heaven and earth, but immortality was jumping out of life and death, so why was it still considered to be pursuing Tao? You must know that the way of the heavens is to exist forever. What we pursue is to abandon the glory of withering away and live forever with the heavens. Therefore, cultivating to become an immortal was both obeying and defying the heavens. All living things have their own ups and downs. If we want to jump out of all living things, then we will have to go against the heavens. As a result, when one successfully cultivates to become an immortal, there will be tribulations to overcome. This is the reason why heaven and earth do not tolerate this. However, after overcoming the tribulations and ascending to the great Tao, the heavenly Tao leaves a slim chance of survival for all living beings. We cultivate to become immortals, but we accept the test according to the way of the heavens. How to go against the heavens and reach the state of obeying the heavens is what we, cultivators, do. Everyone listened attentively, and Mo Chenga was even more attentive. This was the first time she heard this theory about Tao. The path of cultivation was vastly different, and everyone had their own understanding. What this martial uncle said was different from what second uncle said. The day passed in the blink of an eye. When the time came for the lecture to end, the 4 of them had gained some understanding. On their way back, Lui Dao sighed and said, "It was originally a fated chance that I was able to embark on the path of cultivation. If someone had taught me like this at that time, I wouldn't have wasted my time until now." Although Lui Dao had 4 spiritual roots, 2 of his spiritual roots were excellent, so his aptitude should have been slightly better than Mo Chenga's. Mo Chenga was confident she could reach the 10th layer of the aura refining realm before the age of 25 and attack the foundation building realm. Lui Dao was already in his 30s, so what he said wasn't a lie. Su Jingji smiled and said, "Senior Martial Brother Lu is only in his early 30s, so he's quite confident he'll be able to build his foundation before the age of 40. He's much better than many people who have no hope of building their foundation for the rest of their lives." Lui Dao also smiled and patted Su Jingji's shoulder. "Junior Martial Brother Su is right. I'm already very lucky." The 4 of them returned to their residence. Each of them went back to their respective rooms to cultivate and reflect on what they learned today. From then on, Mo Chenga's days became more peaceful. Every 10 days she would go to the lecture with everyone. Once she returned to her room, she would concentrate on cultivating. Every half a month, she would go down the mountain and give the formation she and second uncle developed to the sect's shop for sale. She would then use the spirit stones she got from the sale to buy medicinal pills for second uncle to treat his injuries. 3 months later, she successfully advanced to the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. In the past few months, she had a lot of medicinal pills on her. The medicinal pills left behind by the man and woman in the forest, the prizes from the Immortals Assembly, and the medicinal pills and spirit stones distributed by the sect every month. After eating all the aura-nourishing pills, she finally advanced to the 8th layer. This made Su Jingji extremely envious. He was originally in the 8th layer, but he still hadn't advanced. Qin Shi, on the other hand, had already advanced from the 9th layer to the 10th layer. Among the 5 people in this room, it could be said that he was the only one who hadn't advanced. He could only blame himself for frequently taking errands. In the past 3 months he always went out and didn't have much time to cultivate. It would be strange if he could advance. Because of this, Su Jingji made up his mind to enter closed-door meditation. He wouldn't go out unless he listened to Tao lectures. Su Jingji was in closed-door meditation, and the other 3 were all ascetic cultivators, so Mo Chinga was happy not to have to deal with them. Every day she cultivated, studied formations, and occasionally went out to catch some wild animals to satisfy her cravings. Her days were actually quite free and unfettered. She used the light body technique and sent out a wind blade, causing the running deer to fall. Mo Chinga flew over, picked up the deer and threw it into her Chenkuan bag. She then went back the way she came. When she reached the stream, she fished out the deer's corpse, skinned it and cleaned it. Although the south peak of Mount Yunwu was much worse than the north peak, it was still a rare spirit vein. The small animals caught here were much more delicious than those at the foot of the mountain. She first drained the deer's blood and cleaned its internal organs before peeling off its skin. After that, she cut it into pieces, smeared most of them with salt, wrapped them with spiritual plants, and stuffed them back into her Chenkuan bag. After that, she picked up a piece and carefully sliced it, smeared some seasoning on it and roasted it over a fire. Fire spells were meant to be used like this. Hey, Senior Martial Sister, there's someone roasting something here. Mo Chinga turned around and saw 2 female aura refining cultivators approaching. Judging from their clothes, they were also disciples of Yunwu's sect. She had long sensed their breaths, but this was Mount Yunwu and fellow disciples were everywhere. She crawled out of the haystack and smiled. Hello, Senior Martial Sisters. Her sudden appearance startled the 2 of them. These 2 women seemed to be in their 20s. Their appearances were also pretty good, especially the Senior Martial Sister. She could be considered a beauty. The younger one frowned and rebuked her when she saw Mo Chinga's gaze. Which disciple are you in charge of? How could you be so rude? Mo Chinga was dumbfounded. She couldn't help but smile bitterly. Mo Chinga merely glanced at them, yet she was already regarded as a lecher. She immediately said, Senior Martial Sister, you misunderstood me. I was just secretly looking for a place to hide and roast something to eat. I didn't expect Senior Martial Sisters to discover me, so I was a bit worried. This reason was reasonable, so the Senior Martial Sister said, Junior Martial Brother, don't worry. We just smelled the aroma and came to take a look out of curiosity. We won't tell anyone. She wasn't afraid of telling anyone because Senior Martial Brother Zhou wouldn't care anyway. Of course, she still had a smile on her face. Thank you, Senior Martial Sisters. Meeting each other is fate. Coincidentally, my venison is also roasted. How about we eat it together? Just take it as an apology for scaring you guys just now. Seeing how polite Mo Chinga was, the Junior Martial Sister didn't argue anymore. She smiled and said, Junior Martial Brother, are you serious? Don't tell me you're reluctant to part with it? Mo Chinga took out a large piece of venison from her Chenkuan bag. Senior Martial Sister, look. I still have a lot. I can't eat it all by myself. Mo Chinga's cooking skills weren't just for show. The venison was roasted until it was golden yellow. The aroma drifted far away, making people want to eat it. Sure enough, the Junior Martial Sister was reluctant to leave. She pulled her companion and said, Senior Martial Sister, the Senior Martial Sister said helplessly, we don't know this Junior Martial Brother. How can we? It's not a big deal. He said he wanted to apologize to us. Yes. Mo Chinga giggled and took over the conversation. Senior Martial Sister, don't hesitate. Just treat it as me bribing you after you discovered me eating secretly. The Junior Martial Sister clapped her hands happily. Her impression of Mo Chinga improved greatly. What Junior Martial Brother said is reasonable. Senior Martial Sister, don't be polite with him. What else could the Senior Martial Sister say? They could only let her be. The 3 of them got to know each other. As it turned out, these 2 female cultivators were the disciples of Martial Uncle Lin from the women's yard. Mo Chinga learned from them that Martial Uncle Lin's name was Lin Qingwan. She was also a well-known foundation-building cultivator in Yunwu sect. In fact, she didn't live in the South Peak. It was just that the female disciples in the South Peak were under her management. The person who really managed them on her behalf was this Senior Martial Sister in front of them, Shinbing. This Junior Martial Sister was called Murong Yen. She was Martial Uncle Lin's youngest disciple. After chatting with them, Mo Chinga learned that Shin Bing was a cultivator with double spiritual roots. She was just 20 years old this year, but her cultivation level was already in the peak stage of the aura refining realm. Murong Yen also had triple spiritual roots. She was 18 years old this year and her cultivation level was in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm. Shin Bing wasn't a big deal, but judging from Murong Yan's temperament, she definitely wasn't a person who was willing to cultivate painstakingly. Her spiritual roots were also ordinary, but her cultivation level was actually in the 8th layer. From this, it could be seen that compared to individual cultivators, the disciples of cultivation groups were blessed by heaven. Although Mo Chinga didn't deliberately want to make friends with them, there was no harm in having more friends in this cultivation group. After all, these two were advanced inner disciples of foundation-building cultivators. Besides, she was really lonely. She couldn't reveal her identity as a woman. She had to keep a distance from male cultivators and it wasn't easy for her to meet female cultivators. She often recalled her childhood with Tianxiao and longed to have a friend like that. Sometimes when she was cultivating she would think, if she could start over, would she choose to be immortal and live a peaceful life, or would she come to the cultivation world and struggle to cultivate, struggling to walk on the road to immortality? If she was really a man she might not hesitate. However, as a woman she was still emotional. Chapter 41. After parting ways with her two senior martial sisters, Mo Chinga packed her things and prepared to go back. Today's meal was really worth it. Senior martial sister Shin was very polite, so presumably she wouldn't refuse if she had any requests in the future. As for that senior martial sister Murong, she ate most of the barbecue today. After eating her food, her attitude towards Mo Chinga couldn't be better. Especially when she found out that the food was much more delicious than the food in the dining hall, she immediately said that they would roast food together again in the future. Mo Chinga didn't refuse. She seemed to see Tianxiao's shadow in this senior martial sister Murong. Back then Tianxiao always dragged her to do this and that. It was only when she was together with Tianxiao that she had the joy of her childhood. After walking for a while she stopped. There were several breaths in front of her, which made her feel very strange. It seemed like they weren't friendly with each other. Could it be that there were disciples fighting here? She hesitated for a moment before finally deciding to restrain her breath and quietly approach them. Second brother, you're indeed very capable. You actually managed to enter this sect. Unfortunately, you're only an ordinary disciple. It'll be really difficult for you to seize foundation-building pills. Mo Chinga hurriedly hid behind a big tree when she heard the voice. She peeked and saw several people standing in the open space in front of her. One of them looked a little familiar. She recognized him for a few seconds before realization dawned on her. This was Jiang Shanghong, who had never dealt with them. Several people stood in front of him. All of them looked like youths, but they looked like hooligans. In comparison, Jiang Shanghong's gloomy aura didn't make people feel so uncomfortable. Since they were quite far away, Mo Chinga couldn't clearly see Jiang Shanghong's expression. She only heard him snort and sneer. Jiang Qingxian, what does it have to do with you whether I can seize foundation-building pills or not? You'd better watch yourself. Second brother, why are you so fierce to me, your fourth brother? This isn't the demeanor of an elder brother. I'm afraid eldest uncle will get angry if he sees you like this. His sarcastic tone made Mo Chinga very uncomfortable. Su Jingji once said that Jiang Shanghong could have directly entered the sect, but his qualifications were replaced by his younger cousin. Could it be that this person was the one? This person's cultivation level was indeed not very high. He had already entered the sect as a substitute, yet he was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm. However, there were a few people around him who were not bad. One was in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm like him, 2 were in the 8th layer and 1 was in the 9th layer. Although none of the 5 people had a higher realm than Jiang Shanghong, ants could bite an elephant to death. Jiang Shanghong still couldn't resist them. Moreover, he had to be careful with his life. Yunwu sect rules clearly stated that no one could harm a fellow disciple's life. Otherwise he would be with them. Mo Chinga didn't plan to meddle. No matter how much Jiang Shanghong was bullied, he was still a member of Jiang clan. As an outsider without any foundation, wouldn't she be asking for trouble if she offended a descendant of Jiang clan who could summon wind and rain in Yunwu sect? Sure enough, Jiang Shanghong couldn't restrain himself after hearing these mocking words. He reached into his robe wanting to take something. When the people on the other side saw this, they immediately drew their weapons. In the next moment, Jiang Shanghong took out a handkerchief and wiped his hands. He then cast them a contemptuous glance. I'm just wiping my hands. Why are you so nervous? Mo Chinga almost couldn't hold back her laughter. This Jiang Shanghong was also a talented person. After being ridiculed and ridiculed, his one action made Jiang Qingxian's face turn green. This time it was Jiang Qingxian who couldn't hold back anymore. He winked at his companions and said with a sneer, "Second brother, I heard you were very powerful in the Immortals' Assembly. I really want to learn from you." Jiang Shanghong snorted. "All of you come at me together. Let me see if you've made any progress in the sect." This was obviously a lecturing tone. Jiang Qingxian's face darkened. Relying on the fact that he had more people on his side, the 5 of them took out their spirit tools and talismans. Jiang Shanghong's reaction wasn't slow. The moment they attacked, he took out a talisman and slapped it on his body. He used the light body technique to jump into the air and his spirit tool flew out. Jiang Shanghong's spirit tool was a bell, or perhaps an enlarged bell. He shot a spiritual aura, causing the bell to make a buzzing sound. Mo Chinga suddenly felt dizzy. When she came back to her senses, she immediately realized that this was a spirit tool with hallucinogenic effects. She immediately circulated her qi to her dantian, and sure enough, she no longer had a headache. With an unsightly expression, Jiang Qingxian shouted at his companion, "Guard your dantian. His bell will be useless." He was only in the 7th layer of the aura refining realm, so he really wasn't Qingxi's opponent. Therefore he could only focus on defending against the bell's sound. The 2 men in the 8th and 9th layer of the aura refining realm were barely able to break free from the bell's control. They controlled their spirit tools to attack Jiang Shanghong. Jiang Shanghong had no choice but to stop ringing the bell and dodge the spirit tool's attack. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange shook her head. This bell was indeed a good treasure, but unfortunately, it wasn't very powerful. If her cultivation level wasn't too high, it wouldn't be a problem for her to break free from its control and break it very easily. Sure enough, Jiang Shanghong put away the bell and took out a flying sword. An aura refining cultivator's spiritual aura could only be used to control one spirit tool at a time. This was also the limit in fights of magical powers. Although this bell was very useful in fights of magical power, Jiang Shanghong had no choice but to give it up. However, his flying sword also didn't seem to be an ordinary item. Its spiritual aura was everywhere, so the 3 people besieging it couldn't do anything to it. Jiang Qingxian, on the other hand, was very vicious. The 3 people were already besieging Jiang Shanghong, but he still took out talismans and threw them almost as if he didn't care about money. Mo Chinga didn't know what he thought of this blood-related cousin of his. He simply wanted to take his life. Mo Chinga frowned. It wasn't that she wanted to meddle in other people's business, but she knew very well that she didn't have the qualifications to cause trouble. Besides, the other party was Jiang Clan, which controlled Yunwu sect. However, Jiang Shanghong could be considered someone she knew in Yunwu sect. Compared to Jiang Qingxian, she still felt he was more pleasing to the eye. Sure enough, Jiang Shanghong couldn't hold on any longer. He could still fight evenly against 3 opponents who were only 1 or 2 layers below him. However, there was a person next to him who kept throwing talismans at him, so it was very strenuous for him to hide. He could only choose to dodge everywhere instead of continuing to parry. Jiang Shanghong was also a ruthless person. Even though he was beaten to a sorry state, he didn't make a sound and only focused on dodging everywhere. He looked for an opportunity to fight back. Moreover, he didn't care about the people besieging him and only attacked Jiang Qingxian. When Jiang Shanghong was finally knocked down, Jiang Qingxian was also hit by one of Jiang Shanghong's spells. Seeing that Jiang Shanghong was no longer moving, Jiang Qingxian spat out a curse and kicked him twice. Jiang Shanghong, who was lying on the ground, let out a muffled groan, but he still didn't make a sound. Mo Chinga frowned as she looked over there. Fortunately, Jiang Qingxian still had some misgivings. Seeing Jiang Shanghong lying half dead on the ground made him feel refreshed. He mocked Jiang Shanghong a few more times, then waved his hand and swaggered away with his companions. She waited for a while, but that group of people didn't come back, so she finally came out. She cautiously looked around before she finally walked towards Jiang Shanghong. "Senior Marshal Brother Jiang? Senior Marshal Brother Jiang." Jiang Shanghong's face was covered in blood and his breathing was weak. He opened his eyes to look at her, then closed them again. Mo Chinga had no choice but to cast a spell to help him up. She then used light body technique to fly towards their residence. Chapter 42. Mo Chenga stealthily carried Jiang Shanghong back, then carried him into the house and knocked on Louis Dao's door. Senior Marshal Brother Liu, Senior Marshal Brother Liu? After a while, Louis Dao finally opened the door. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, what's the matter? Mo Chenga pointed behind her. Louis Dao was shocked when he saw what was behind her. Jiang Shanghong was lying on a chair, his face covered in blood and on the verge of death. Louis Dao first checked Jiang Shanghong's injuries to confirm they weren't life-threatening. He then looked outside the house to make sure there was no one else there before asking in a low voice, "What's going on?" Mo Chenga pointed at Jiang Shanghong, then at his house. "Senior Marshal Brother Liu, let's talk inside." Louis Dao thought for a moment, then nodded. All the doors outside were open, so it wasn't a good place to talk. At that moment the other two doors opened. Su Jingji and Qin Shi also came out. Upon seeing this scene, Su Jingji was also gobsmacked while Qin Shi wrinkled his brows. Louis Dao gestured for them to be quiet, then carried Jiang Shanghong into his house. He took out a medicinal pill and fed it to him before signaling the others to come in. After the other three people entered his room and closed the door, Louis Dao asked, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, what's going on?" Mo Chenga told him what happened, then said, "From what I saw, Jiang Qingxian didn't seem to be afraid Senior Marshal Brother Jiang would reveal this matter, so he didn't dare to make it public and secretly brought him back." Su Jingji interrupted, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi did the right thing. Among the two core formation grandmasters of Jiang clan, one of them is Jiang Qingxian's direct elder. Because of that, Jiang Qingxian has an elder protecting him, so he's completely lawless. Since he dared to beat Senior Marshal Brother Jiang like this, others definitely won't dare to do anything to him. If people find out it was Junior Marshal Brother Yi who brought him back, they might even implicate him." They weren't as good as Su Jingji when it came to matters related to clans and sects, so they didn't object. Mo Chenga said with a bitter expression, "I just thought Senior Marshal Brother Jiang would have most likely been injured even if he survived being thrown there. Besides, Jiang Qingxian really went too far." Louis Dao patted Mo Chenga's shoulder and comforted her. "Rest assured, only the few of us know about this. It'll be fine as long as we don't tell anyone else. In the future, tell Junior Marshal Brother Jiang to go out less. He really can't prevent others from scheming against him." Among them, Su Jingji was a member of a small cultivation clan while the others were individual cultivators. They really didn't have a good impression of hedonistic sons of rich families who took advantage of their power to bully others. Compared to them, Jiang Shanghong only treated them coldly. The others nodded. Su Jingji asked, "How's Senior Marshal Brother Jiang's injury?" "His dantian was not injured, but his meridians were affected. It is not serious, but it will take some time to recover." After confirming that Jiang Shanghong was alright, everyone dispersed. Su Jingji and Qin Shi went to cultivate. Mo Chenga felt like she was meddling in other people's business, but she was too embarrassed to let Louis Dao clean up the mess, so she stayed behind. The two of them chatted on and off. When night fell, they finally saw Jiang Shanghong move. Jiang Shanghong opened his eyes and looked at the two of them in confusion. Soon after, a vigilant look appeared in his eyes. He abruptly sat up, but his wound hurt. His face immediately scrunched up. Louis Dao comforted him. "Junior Marshal Brother Jiang, don't worry. We won't tell anyone." Seeing that this wasn't his room and the two people in front of him didn't seem hostile, Jiang Shanghong slowly calmed down. He asked, "Were you the ones who saved me?" However, his tone was still bad, as if he was saying, "How could you possibly have saved me?" They finally managed to carry him back with great difficulty, yet this was his reaction. Mo Chenga was a bit unhappy. She snorted and said, "We just carried you back like you were a dead pig. Since you're alright, return the healing medicine to Senior Marshal Brother Liu and go back to your room." Jiang Shanghong didn't refute her. He took out a jade bottle from his robe and placed it on the table, wanting to get out of bed. Louis Dao saw him swaying, so he helped him up and advised, "Junior Marshal Brother Jiang, you should go out less in the future. Fortunately, Junior Marshal Brother Yi saw you and brought you back, otherwise..." Jiang Shanghong uttered an "N" then said, "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Liu." He then went back to his room and closed the door in front of Louis Dao. Obviously, he didn't appreciate Louis Dao's kindness. Mo Chenga was annoyed. She said to Louis Dao, "He really took my kindness for granted. How could Louis Dao find him pleasing to the eye? It was just that he had a lot of experience and was a lot more mature, so he could only advise her, 'Forget it. Since Junior Marshal Brother Jiang doesn't want to deal with us, we'll just stop dealing with him in the future.'" In any case, she didn't have any dealings with Jiang Shanghong. This time she only brought him back conveniently, so she didn't need to be angry. Forget it. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, I'm going back to cultivate. Aside from this little episode, her life didn't change much. Oh, a little bit. Sure enough, that Senior Marshal Sister Murong often looked for her to play. Summoning talismans often flew to her, and her roommates thought she really hooked up with someone, so they always smiled at her ambiguously. But since she invited her so enthusiastically, she couldn't refuse. Besides, this Senior Marshal Sister Murong always used all kinds of seeds to seduce her, so she couldn't help but go. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, hurry up. I can't hurry. Senior Marshal Sister, don't be impatient. Murmurs could be heard coming from the bushes. Two people were struggling. It's done. Finally, Mo Chenga brushed the seasoning one last time and gave a piece of roast meat to Murong Yen. This Senior Marshal Sister Murong really had a common language with her. She only called her out for one thing, to roast meat for her. Mo Chenga frowned. Senior Marshal Sister, eating food like this will affect your cultivation. While gnawing on a piece of pork rib, Murong Yen rolled her eyes. Murong Yen gnawed on a piece of pork rib as she rolled her eyes. Don't think I don't know that food with spiritual aura has less pill poison left behind than medicinal pills. You just don't want to roast it for me. It's not that I don't want to give Senior Marshal Sister face, but Senior Marshal Sister, you're leaning on a big tree to enjoy the shade, so you don't know the difficulties ordinary disciples like us face. The group's minor competition will be held in 3 years. My cultivation level is only in the 8th layer, so if I don't work hard, I'll have no hope. I can only wait another 10 years. Murong Yen could understand Mo Chenga's words. She pondered for a while, then said, Senior Marshal Sister also feels bad for delaying your cultivation. How about this? Junior Marshal Brother, every time you sneak out to eat, send me a summoning talisman. Is that okay? What did she mean by sneak? Mo Chenga nodded gloomily. No problem. Murong Yen gnawed on a large piece of pork rib, then stretched out her hand to pinch Mo Chenga's face. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, your expression really makes me want to bully you. Mo Chenga's hand was smeared with grease, but she resisted firmly. Senior Marshal Sister, you're too bad. If you pinch me again, I won't roast meat for you. Murong Yen was still smiling. If you don't roast meat for me, I'll pinch you again. Mo Chenga retreated in defeat. Fine, I'll roast you another piece. Don't pinch me. After accepting the bribe, Murong Yen let go. While drooling, she stared at Mo Chenga roasting and asked, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you really 17? Why do you look like you're 14 or 15? Her question made Mo Chenga even more depressed. She couldn't do anything about it. Among women, she wasn't considered tall, let alone as a man. Moreover, her skin was smooth and her face was hairless. Pretending to be a man was also very difficult for her. Fortunately, Murong Yen was still kind. She patted Mo Chenga's head and said, Don't worry, you'll grow taller. Mo Chenga smiled bitterly in her heart. If she was a man, 17 years old wouldn't be considered too late. Unfortunately, she wasn't, so the chances of her growing taller weren't high. She gloomily handed the roasted meat to Murong Yen, told her something, and went to find a place to wash her hands and face. This place was already upstream of the stream. There was a waterfall above it, and the water flowed down, forming a deep pool below. After making many turns, she was about to go to the pool to wash her hands, but she was stunned. The waterfall was several hundred feet high and the water flowed rapidly, but there was actually a person sitting and meditating under the waterfall. It wasn't appropriate to say he was sitting. Under the waterfall was a deep pool and there were no rocks to sit on. That person was sitting cross-legged on the water, letting the waterfall wash down and hit his body. What kind of martial art was he practicing? Mo Chenga was a bit dazed. This seemed like a martial art from the secular world. In fact, martial arts practitioners in the secular world cultivated body refining techniques. It was just that they weren't as brilliant as those in the cultivation world. But this person, Mo Chenga couldn't tell. He didn't seem to have the aura of a cultivator, but he seemed very powerful. This person looked very familiar to her. He seemed to be Qin Shi. Chapter 43. Mo Chenga wasn't too familiar with this Qin Shi. Although he wasn't like Jiang Shanghong who didn't interact with them at all, he had always been very cold. He rarely spoke when he was with them. Usually he only focused on cultivating and rarely went out. He also didn't cause trouble. Among Yunwu sect's aura-refining disciples he wasn't eye-catching. As for cultivation level, although it wasn't easy for him to reach the 10th layer of the aura-refining realm at his age, it wasn't that rare. As for diligence, as long as one was determined to cultivate, 6 or 7 out of 10 people would be as diligent as him. As for his background, he was just an individual cultivator from a destitute cultivation clan. There was really no reason to pay attention to him. If there was anything about him that made him stand out, it would be his handsome appearance. However, for a cultivator this was not really a good point. For a cultivator, after cultivating, they would naturally be reborn, so they would not be ugly at all. Therefore, Mo Chinga didn't pay too much attention to Qin Shi, and she wasn't interested in studying his cultivation technique. It wasn't until now that she found out he actually cultivated body refining technique. The so-called body refining technique was also a branch of cultivation technique. Aside from the 5 elements and yin and yang, there were many cultivation techniques with special effects in this world, and body refining technique was one of them. This kind of cultivation technique could be traced back to the distant past era. At that time, when the world was just created, immortals, devils, humans, and beasts all lived together. In terms of cultivation, spiritual beasts were more blessed than humans because their bodies were tyrannical and didn't need magic weapons. After cultivating to a certain extent, they could withstand heavenly tribulations. Humans, on the other hand, needed magic weapons and other similar items to withstand heavenly tribulations, so body refining technique was born. When a tyrannical body was matched with a powerful magic weapon, heavenly tribulations were relatively easier to withstand. However, even in the distant past era, body refining technique was never the focus of cultivation because humans were born weak. Cultivating body refining technique was far inferior to spiritual beasts. Moreover, there were many cultivators with great divine power in ancient times, so people often transcended heavenly tribulations and ascended. Now, however, it wasn't the case. Not to mention ascending, even those who cultivated to the nascent soul realm were few and far between. Heavenly tribulations weren't as powerful as they used to be. Moreover, excellent body refining technique was lost, so cultivators below the core formation realm almost didn't cultivate body refining technique. She really didn't expect this Qin Shi to also cultivate body refining technique. It seemed his talent was indeed outstanding, but she didn't know why he wasn't accepted by other cultivation groups. After looking for a while, she washed her hands and face and went back the way she came. What kind of cultivation technique he practiced was his private matter. She couldn't be bothered to look into it. As soon as they returned, Murong Yen made a big fuss. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you actually took so long to wash your face." Mo Chinga said, "Senior Marshal Sister, it's getting late. Aren't you going back yet?" Murong Yen looked at the color of the sky. It was already afternoon, so she was extremely reluctant to part. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, the next time you come out, you must call me." Mo Chinga nodded. N. Murong Yen took out a bag from her pocket and handed it to Mo Chinga. "Here, next time you call me, I'll give you something good." "Thank you, Senior Marshal Sister." The reason she was willing to be ordered around by this Senior Marshal Sister as a manservant was precisely because of this thing. Ever since Murong Yen found out about the characteristics of Mo Chinga's magic arts, she used seeds to seduce Mo Chinga. That was why Mo Chinga came to work as a manservant. Murong Yen had a senior marshal brother who worked in the group's medicinal garden, so it was very convenient for him to get seeds. Mo Chinga didn't have any connections, but someone was willing to help her, so she naturally seized the opportunity. In any case, she only needed to roast something. She could exchange it for a few bags of seeds that couldn't be bought. "Alright, I know it's because of this thing that you're willing to let me order you around. Alright, I'm going back." Murong Yen waved her hand at Mo Chinga. She wiped her hands clean and pretended to be a virtuous lady before she leisurely walked away. Mo Chinga couldn't help but laugh as she watched Murong Yan's back. This was also where Senior Marshal Sister Murong was similar to Tianxiao. She obviously loved to play around, but she had no choice but to pretend to be a virtuous lady. Tianxiao. Mo Chinga probably wouldn't see her again in this lifetime. Yi Jingwen said that if she succeeded in her cultivation, she could naturally go back to see her relatives. But later, she realized it was best not to go back after separating from the secular world. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to accept the birth, death, and old age of her relatives. To avoid affecting her cultivation, since she'd already severed her ties with the secular world, it was better not to go back. With a faint sense of sadness, Mo Chinga returned to her room. There were several breaths in the other rooms. Presumably, they were all cultivating. Mo Chinga also returned to her room and began to examine the seeds Murong Yen gave her these past few days. She recognized some seeds but didn't recognize others. Most of them were seeds of medicinal plants. They didn't have any special uses and couldn't be used in fights of magical power. Her greenwood art was used to plant spiritual aura inside the seeds the moment they were sprouted. In a split second those plants would grow and be used to attack. Therefore, seeds that didn't have any special uses or needed too much spiritual aura to grow also wouldn't work. This was the limit. Only some low-grade plants could be used to attack. After looking at some seeds, Chinga really couldn't recognize them, so she got up and prepared to go to 10,000 Laws Pavilion. The so-called 10,000 Laws Pavilion was the place where Yunwu sect collected cultivation techniques. Sect disciples could go there once a month. According to their cultivation levels they could choose some and bring them back. Ever since she entered the sect, Chinga hadn't gone there because she already had the art of Sunu for cultivation and the greenwood art for fights of magical power. She didn't need to choose other cultivation techniques. Compared to other buildings, 10,000 Laws Pavilion's location was rather special. It was neither on the South Peak nor the North Peak. Instead it was located in a remote valley between the two peaks. Chinga searched for a while before she finally found the entrance by following the traces of a formation. It was a cave that didn't stand out at all. As soon as she approached the cave entrance, the formation at the entrance suddenly emitted a dazzling light. Chinga didn't panic. Instead, she placed her identity tablet on an empty spot on the mountain wall, and the light immediately faded. The outermost formation of 10,000 Laws Pavilion could be entered as long as one had a disciple's identity tablet. After she stepped into the cave, she saw a very spacious hall inside. There were cave entrances with restrictions on 3 sides, but she didn't know where they led to. Moonstones illuminated the cave as bright as day. The inside of the cave was cool and dry. Chinga didn't know whether this was the effect of a formation or not, but it wasn't only suitable for preserving jade slips. Some books made of paper or other materials could also be preserved. In the corner of the cave there was a huge table. Behind the table sat several aura-refining cultivators with ordinary cultivation levels. Some of them were meditating and some of them were dozing off with their heads tilted. Upon seeing her coming in, only one of them lazily raised his eyelids and said, "Identity tablet." Chinga handed over her disciple's identity tablet. The man took it and also took out a jade slip for her to leave her imprint on before he said, "Follow me." He walked to one of the cave entrances and flashed a jade slip. The jade slip emitted a ray of light which fell on the restriction and instantly disappeared. The man threw the jade slip to her. "The jade slip can't leave your body. You must come out before the Z hour. You're not allowed to keep any damaged items. If you need a duplicate, bring the jade slip here. You can make a maximum of 3 jade slips. Alright, you can go in now." Chinga thanked him, then took the jade slip and entered the cave. This cave was a bit bigger than the hall outside. The front was densely packed with books, and in the back, aside from jade slips, there were all kinds of strange things. She walked over and flipped through the books first. She found that most of them were ordinary cultivation techniques or were passed down in the mortal world. Presumably, the things recorded in these books weren't profound. Towards the back there were things recorded on the cauldron. There was a piece of metal engraved with densely packed words, as well as a glass bead that seemed to have many words inside. These things were not ordinary. They were either alchemy techniques, mystical items, or special magical techniques. Chinga first chose a jade slip called The Complete Guide to Spiritual Plants. Then she began to slowly look for useful things inside. She didn't need cultivation techniques and she didn't have the energy to learn pill concocting, tool refining, and the like. Thus, she found a book called The Essence of Formations. Finally, she found a jade slip that recorded the history of Yunwu sect. When she went out, the disciple guarding the cave was a bit surprised. He asked, "You've already chosen?" It wasn't strange for him to be surprised. After looking at Chinga's identity tablet, he knew she was a disciple who came here for the first time. Which disciple didn't choose something carefully during their first time in 10,000 Laws Pavilion and spent a lot of time choosing something good? Unlike her, who came out after only an hour. Chinga nodded and handed over the jade tablet and 3 jade slips. "Sorry for troubling you, senior martial brother." The disciple took them and raised his chin at her. 3 spirit stones. Ha! Chinga was dumbfounded. "Spirit stones?" The disciple said somewhat impatiently, "Junior martial brother, don't you know that copying jade slips requires spirit stones?" She indeed didn't know. However, copying a jade slip for 1 jade slip wasn't a lot, so she immediately took out the spirit stones and handed them over. The disciple took them and quickly copied the jade slips and handed them back to her. Chinga took them and thanked him. Although 3 spirit stones wasn't a lot, ordinary aura refining disciples only got 5 spirit stones a month. If she came in every month to copy 3 jade slips, she'd be spending more than half of her spirit stones. Apparently, even if she entered a cultivation group, her days wouldn't be too good. Chapter 44. After returning from 10,000 Laws Pavilion, Mo Chenga once again entered closed-door meditation. First, she found the uses of the seeds Murong Yen gave her in the complete appraisement of spiritual plants and found several of them were very useful, so she entered closed-door meditation to find the most suitable use for them. Second, she had been idle for a while and had a bottle of aura-converging pills, so it was time for her to continue cultivating. Of course, closed-door meditation for aura-refining cultivators like her wasn't like high-level cultivators who stayed in their practice rooms all the time. They had to eat, exercise and take a bath. Therefore, Mo Chenga's so-called closed-door meditation was only when she spent all her time cultivating and didn't go out for a stroll. One of the seeds Murong Yen gave her was called bewitching flower, which was one of the raw materials for bewitching powder. Mo Chenga spent several days studying the spiritual aura of the seed thoroughly and was finally able to make it sprout and bloom in an instant. The smell of this flower really had a bewitching effect. There was also a kind of fire thorn, which was much better than the ordinary thorns she had. Its innate talisman contained fire spiritual aura, so if one touched it unguarded, one would be burned. When she could skillfully use these 2 seeds and stabilized her 8th layer realm, she could be considered to have temporarily come out of closed-door meditation. At this time she encountered the biggest problem: she had no money. In the secular world, it was difficult to move a single step without money. In the cultivation world it wasn't much better. However, money wasn't gold or silver but spirit stones. Mo Chenga counted the things in her Chenkuan bag. Aside from the spirit stones used to lay formations and a bottle of temporarily unused aura-converging pills, there weren't many things that could be exchanged for money. The man from Inclan's spirit stones had long been used to buy medicinal pills. Their spirit tools couldn't be exchanged for money in the market square of Mount Yunwu, otherwise she would be in trouble. The only things left were some spiritual plants, tool-refining materials, and a bead the size of a wine cup. After asking second uncle, Mo Chenga sold all the materials. As for the bead, even second uncle didn't know its use, so she just left it there. However, those 2 were aura-refining cultivators, so the materials they carried weren't very good. She didn't exchange them for much and soon spent them all. Once again she struggled to make a living. Because of her poor spiritual roots, she couldn't take medicinal pills and had no choice but to use a spirit-gathering formation. However, all of these required spirit stones. Otherwise, according to the sect's ration, she would need 3 aura-nourishing pills and 5 spirit stones a month. If she wanted to advance to the 10th layer, it would really take a long time. But other than formations, she didn't know anything else, and the money she earned from selling formations was only enough to treat second uncle's injuries. During another sermon, Su Jingji saw Mo Chenga moaning and groaning. After he asked for the reason, he asked her with astonishment, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, why didn't you go and get an errand? This is much better than finding your own way to make money." Mo Chenga was dumbfounded. Su Jingji sighed and earnestly instructed her, "Why do we have to risk our lives to enter a cultivation group? Isn't it precisely because the cultivation group has abundant resources? In addition to the monthly ration, the sect also has many errands for us to do, and these errands have other rewards. You see, I didn't cultivate much in the first 3 months. I ran errands everywhere and earned a lot of spirit stones, which allowed me to cultivate in seclusion for half a year without any worries." His words made Mo Chenga suddenly see the light. She actually forgot that cultivation group disciples had their own benefits and didn't need to think about seeking work outside. Mo Chenga patted her head a few times, then temporarily stopped cultivating and began to run errands. The so-called errands were missions given to disciples by the cultivation group. Some things were inconvenient for part-time disciples to do, so official disciples would be the ones to complete them. Once again Mo Chenga entered the steward's hall. This was the second time she saw Marshal Uncle Yu in the courtyard's main hall. This Marshal Uncle Yu was cultivating again. On the other hand, there was another aura-refining disciple who was tidying up something on the side. Upon seeing her, this seemingly ordinary male disciple asked, "Are you going to hand it over or take it?" Mo Chenga pondered for a moment before she reacted. She said, "I'll have to trouble Senior Marshal Brother. I'm here to get an errand." The man extended his hand towards her. "Identity tablet." Mo Chenga took out her identity tablet and handed it over. The man examined it and confirmed that there was nothing wrong with the identity tablet before he threw her a jade slip. The white ones are free as long as you meet the requirements. Mo Chenga inserted her divine sense into the slip and all the errands appeared in her mind. These errands could basically be divided into several categories. The first was to guard the sect and other miscellaneous matters. The second was to go out and search for certain things, and the third was to guard the spirit stone mine and run a shop. The first type of errands were all quite popular. She could tell from the attitude of the guarding disciples in the 10,000 Laws Pavilion that day that the rewards were good and the errands were in the sect. The second type of errands were rich, but they were more difficult and required luck. The third type of errands required her to spend a lot of time away from the sect. Mo Chenga didn't want to do this. Although she had a lot of time to cultivate, the outside world was certainly not as good as the spirit veins in the sect. In that case she could only choose the first type. Mo Chenga looked up and said with a smile, "Senior Martial Brother, I want to do this errand of collecting heavenly dew." The disciple glanced at her a few times. Because the reward for this errand wasn't high and it was very complicated, few people were willing to do it. Of course he wouldn't have any objections. He took out a jade slip, recorded something and handed it to her. "Okay, go to the North Peaks Xingyang Hall and look for Martial Uncle Wang Qiao. He'll tell you what to do." Mo Chenga took the jade slip, thanked him and went straight to the North Peak without stopping. In fact, how could she not want a better errand? However, after looking around, all the good ones were already taken. Although this one was a bit troublesome, in any case it was on the North Peak. The spiritual aura in the North Peak was rich, so spending some time cultivating there every day might be much better than cultivating in the South Peak. With the jade slip, her journey to the North Peak was smooth. The North and South Peaks of Mount Yunwu were several hundred feet apart, separated by an abyss. Aura refining disciples couldn't fly in the air, so it would probably take more than half a day to go from the South Peak to the North Peak using light body technique. However, there was an expert senior who built an iron chain bridge between the two peaks, which greatly facilitated the disciples' travel. If they crossed the bridge, it would only take them a short while to reach the North Peak. As soon as she arrived at the North Peak, Mo Chenga felt that the spiritual aura here was several times denser than in the South Peak. Cultivating in this kind of place was much more effective. Moreover, the North Peak was heavily guarded. Not only were there foundation-building cultivators patrolling, but there were also extremely powerful formations and restrictions. With Mo Chenga's attainments and formations, she could only see that this formation was a set of Yunwu sect's Great Mountain Protecting Formation. In short, it was a formation within a formation. According to common sense, the power of the formation inside the formation should be enough to split the mountains and split the seas. Mo Chenga found Xingyang Hall and told the guarding disciple that she was looking for Martial Uncle Wang Qiao. The disciple pointed to a side hall. Mo Chenga walked over and looked around. Seeing that there was only a 10th layer aura refining disciple inside, she couldn't help but feel strange. This disciple was a female cultivator. She was also about 20 years old and had a beautiful appearance. Most female cultivators weren't that ugly. As cultivators, they naturally had some different ways to beautify themselves. In addition, their bodies had spiritual aura, so their skin was naturally fair and bright. The female disciple turned around and asked, "Who are you? What's the matter?" Mo Chenga hastily greeted her and said, "Senior Martial Sister, I received the errand of collecting heavenly dew and came to look for Martial Uncle Wang." "Oh, you can come in. I'm his disciple. Just tell me." Upon hearing this, Mo Chenga handed the jade tablet she received to her. The disciple examined it and smiled. "So it's Junior Martial Brother Yi. My name is Wang Qiani. In the future you can just tell me about this errand." Her surname was also Wang. Judging from her tone, her relationship with Martial Uncle Wang wasn't shallow. Mo Chenga answered, "Yes. Senior Martial Sister, can you tell me what to do?" Wang Qiani took out several jade bottles and handed them to her. Heavenly dew is dew that hasn't dried yet and contains spiritual aura in the early morning. Every day at the hour of the Yin and Mao, go to the forest to collect dew and bring it here when it's full. Remember, I want the dew on clean spirit grass, nothing else. Got it? Mo Chenga took the jade bottles and asked, "How many bottles do I need to collect per day?" Wang Qiani smiled. "It's already good enough if you can collect 1 bottle per day." "How many bottles?" "Just go and give them to me every day at the hour of the Mao. I'll give you as many as you have." Chapter 45. When Mo Chinga first heard the requirement to collect heavenly dew, it seemed quite simple. She even muttered, "Why didn't they ask a part-time disciple to do it?" It was only after she went there herself that she realized it wasn't simple. There were many flowers and trees with spiritual energy, but there were few spiritual herbs. Moreover, only dew with spiritual energy could be called heavenly dew. Often, spiritual herbs grew on cliffs, so one had to fly up and down to collect them. After busying herself for 4 hours, she only managed to gather less than half a bottle. Seeing that the sun had already risen, she shook her head helplessly and gave the jade bottle containing the heavenly dew to Wang Qianni. Seeing that Wang Qianni was satisfied with the bottle Mo Chinga brought, Mo Chinga heaved a sigh of relief. She then left Jinyang Hall and returned to the South Peak. This errand wasn't difficult at all. As for the income, she could earn about a dozen spirit stones a month, which could be exchanged for 5 or 6 aura-nourishing pills. However, these medicinal pills were still a drop in the bucket for Mo Chinga. Therefore, after asking Su Jingji, she went to the steward's hall to ask if there were any other errands she could do at the same time. Now that she thought about money, Mo Chinga felt like her head was about to explode. In the past, second uncle always took care of everything for her, so she basically didn't need to worry about it. Later on, when second uncle was injured, she stopped taking pills and was barely able to get by. But now that she wanted to break through to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, money became her biggest problem. Aside from Su Jingji, who earned a lot of spirit stones some time ago, the others living with her also started to get busy with this matter. Louis Dao was the same as Mo Chinga. He went out early and came back late every day. Jiang Shanghong said it was best for them not to go out, but without medicinal pills to cultivate, he couldn't care about anything else. Qin Shi, on the other hand, was quite good. Because he had some knowledge about concocting medicinal pills, a martial uncle in the North Peak took him away. In total, Mo Chinga accepted 3 errands. Even when senior martial sister Murong came to look for her to play, she didn't respond. After being so busy for several months, Mo Chinga finally stopped making money because Yunwu sect made a public announcement. All the aura refining disciples gathered in the square. Over 1,000 people were completely silent. Not long after, a person walked out of the real treasure hall. It was the sect leader, Fang Dingyue, followed by several foundation building cultivators. "Disciples, I've gathered all of you here today to tell you something. In order to test our disciples, Jindao School and Zixia sect invited us to fight against Yunwu sect. I've already accepted their challenge. This time, all disciples above the 7th layer of the aura refining realm must participate. 1 month later they will enter Miwu Valley for 3 days. The winner will be rewarded handsomely. As for the specifics, the disciple in charge will explain it to you in detail. Disciples, for the sake of Yunwu sect's reputation, I hope you'll spare no effort." In the square, all the disciples whispered to each other. Some of the more experienced disciples who had experienced such things shook their heads and explained to the new disciples. On Mo Chinga's side, aside from senior martial brother Zhou, the others hadn't been in the sect for more than a year. Only a few of them had heard about it and told them about it. As it turned out, in the vicinity of Yunwu sect, there were 2 cultivation groups with similar strength, Jindao School and Zixia sect. These 3 cultivation groups stood like a tripod in this area. All resources and spirit veins had to be shared with the other 2 cultivation groups. The 3 sects rose and fell. If one of them became stronger, they would want to get a bigger share of the resources. However, they were also afraid that the conflict would be too intense and all 3 would be injured. In the end, they thought of a way to compete without losing their strength. This was the origin of Miwu Valley's challenge. The so-called Miwu Valley was a valley between the monasteries of the 3 cultivation groups. The valley was filled with dense fog, so ordinary people couldn't enter. The seniors of the 3 cultivation groups laid restrictions and formations in this valley so that their disciples could enter and compete with each other. The one who persisted until the end would be the winner. The sect head's voice once again rang out. "Disciples, in this competition, the disciple who persisted until the end will receive a high-grade spirit tool, 2 bottles of aura-converging pills, and 100 spirit stones. In addition, according to the number of people defeated, you will receive spirit stones as a reward. Even if you fail halfway, you will still receive spirit stones as a reward. Alright, supervising disciple, take the disciple under control back and explain everything in detail. In half a month the challenge will begin." Mo Chinga, who was filled with questions, followed everyone back to their residence. Senior martial brother Zhou called everyone to gather in the courtyard and once again explained the matter of Miwu Valley. As it turned out, for the sake of this competition, the seniors of the 3 cultivation groups placed restrictions on every disciple's identity tablet. As long as the identity tablet was hung on the disciple's body, there wouldn't be any life-threatening danger. Once the identity tablet left the body, the person would be teleported away in an instant, and the person who was teleported away would be considered to have failed. Miwu Valley was very big. Once you entered, there would be the danger of encountering spiritual beasts. However, this could also be regarded as an additional reward. The spiritual beasts and spiritual plants inside would belong to the disciple who participated in the competition. Mo Chinga carefully calculated and couldn't help but become interested in this competition in Miwu Valley. If she persisted until the end, there would be 2 bottles of aura-converging pills, and each bottle contained 10 pills. She already had 1 bottle, which contained 30 aura-converging pills, which would be enough for her to advance to the 9th layer of the aura-refining realm. If she was lucky, she might even be able to advance to the 10th layer. Even if she didn't persist until the end, there would still be spirit stones as a reward. Moreover, there wouldn't be any life-threatening danger, so it was completely worth the risk. Right now, whenever she saw spirit stones and medicinal pills, her eyes would shine. She really couldn't miss this opportunity. With such a generous reward, the others were naturally the same. Seeing how excited they were, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou let out a humph and poured cold water on them. Junior Marshal Brothers, do you think this reward is so easy to obtain? The transporting formation in Miwu Valley will teleport you to a random place in the valley. If you happen to be teleported to the mouth of a spiritual beast, you'll be teleported out. In addition, the terrain in the valley is complicated and dangerous. You might walk into the midst of enemies while you're walking. Therefore, after you enter Miwu Valley, the first thing you must do is find a safe place to rendezvous with your fellow disciples. You won't be able to persist for a long time by relying on your own strength. Once everyone heard this, they calmed down a bit. Someone asked, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, you're also going, right? Senior Marshal Brother Zhou nodded. Yes, I'm also an aura-refining disciple, so I naturally have to go. Everyone here is in the 7th layer of the aura-refining realm or above, so everyone has to go. To tell you the truth, the last time we competed was more than 10 years ago. At that time, I was already in the 10th layer of the aura-refining realm, but I didn't even last for a day before I was besieged and forced out. Therefore, you mustn't lower your guard. They were more or less clear about Senior Marshal Brother Zhou's strength. Usually, Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was responsible for explaining to them the difficulties they encountered in their cultivation. It could be said that Senior Marshal Brother Zhou's realm was much higher than theirs. Now that even Senior Marshal Brother Zhou said this, everyone couldn't help but suppress their excitement and think about the opportunities and difficulties involved. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou chuckled. You don't need to be so worried. Even if you come out very quickly, you won't lose anything. Just do your best. Buy some talismans or something to protect yourself or form a small team with others. The transporting formation can teleport up to 5 people at the same time, so it'll be best if all 5 of you can gather together. Alright, go and prepare yourselves. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou waved his hand and left. Everyone else went back to their respective rooms while discussing their own plans. Once they returned to their rooms, Louis Dao asked, Junior Marshal Brothers, what are your plans? Su Jingji said, of course we'll go together. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, that transporting formation can teleport up to 5 people at the same time, so we'll be in the same room. As he spoke, he glanced at Jiang Shanghong. Unexpectedly, Jiang Shanghong didn't walk away nor did he express any objections. Apparently, he also knew he wouldn't be able to go alone this time. Louis Dao nodded. I also think so. Junior Marshal Brothers, what do you think? Mo Chinga said, I have no objections. Of course, staying with Senior Marshal Brothers will be safer. Qin Shi also nodded. Everyone looked at Jiang Shanghong. His expression was still stiff, but in the end he nodded. All right. Louis Dao was quite happy. This was the first time everyone worked together. That being the case, let's discuss what we should do this time. Junior Marshal Brothers, that you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.